Yeah, yeah. You let me know when you're ready. How do I look? Passable.
Sharp.
You look old, man. Jeez. Old enough to be president. I guess that's not even funny.
Well, that's the present kind of
Yeah.
How, for managing statements, time at the end for final statement, is it 2:30? How should I be managing that clock?
You know, watch it as a general guideline. A half hour will feel pretty right to you. So, and yeah, okay. Oh, we're live apparently, so let me just get right to it. My name is Chris Pitts. I am the current president of the Waban Area Council. I'm part of the debate working group that put these debates together and have been doing so for 14 years. How do you like that, huh? So this is day 2. We're going to work on the school committee today, but let me just tell you a little bit. The 4 area councils are Waban, Upper Falls, Newton Highlands, and Newtonville. And the working group is made up of people from each one of those councils. I should tell you right now that yesterday's debates for the mayoral and the city councils are up on our websites and Facebook. You can go to wabanareacouncil.com to find them. You'll be able to find them on the other area councils as well. But do like our Facebook so you will get notices. We don't post a lot, but you will get things like this debate and other important forums that we'll hold throughout the year. Each area council is made up normally of 9 elected people. They are elected, and you'll be able to vote for us in the upcoming election at a separate table when you go to do your voting. There's an area council, if there's one in your catchment area. They're not area councils everywhere. There's only 4 of them so far. And you can vote for us during early voting starting October 28th, I believe, and going through November 1st. So let me tell you how we got here. We put out a survey, and we got a lot of questions, really a lot of questions. And so our job was to try and mold those questions down, and we delivered them to Adam and all the other moderators. And they're the ones who have the final say about what they're going to ask you. And we have no privy to that. So I would say if you've done your homework, you probably know what they're going to ask, for the most part, maybe not everything. So those questions haven't been shared with anyone. So let me tell you who Adam Bernstein is, our moderator. You're in great hands because he's the director of the Fig City News. He's been writing about Newton Public Schools since the newspaper's inception. A longtime Newton resident, he has conducted in-depth interviews with the local candidates and leaders. Adam combines his perspective as an active NPS parent with fact-based, policy-focused style of journalism, which derives from his experience writing energy policy research as an investor. Adam's a graduate of Emory University and Dartmouth College. And so this afternoon, he brings all that expertise to the table, and we're happy about that. The format's really simple, and I'm just going to break it down. Questions you want to try and answer within 45 seconds. You'll see Gregory over there holding up a sign that'll give you a warning, and then for 15 seconds later, he'll tell you to stop. It's up to Adam if you want to go further or whatever. You know, the idea is to find out who you guys are and what you're going to do in office. So that's the bottom line, and he has sway over that. So let's just get to the meat. Rebuttals generally are 30 seconds, but it's, again, Adam's discretion. And I think that's pretty much all the housekeeping we need to do, and I will now turn it over to Adam Bernstein.
Thank you, Chris. I will give short biographies provided by the 2 candidates. To my immediate right is Victor Lee. Victor Lee is a Newton native and parent. He is a superintendent fellow at the Arlington Public Schools and a doctoral candidate in education leadership at Harvard's Graduate School of Education. Victor holds an MBA from Wharton and is an expert in data-driven decision-making, district-wide policy setting strategy, and budget management. To Victor's right is Jim Murphy. Jim is a longtime Newton resident and retired social studies teacher and administrator in Boston, Weston, Everett, Weymouth, and West Hampton. He is running to bring his deep experience with educational policy and how it translates into classroom practice and student learning to the school committee. Thank you both. According to the 4 area councils survey, Newton residents are most concerned with how our city is managed and how those decisions affect our public schools. They cited issues of curriculum, standards, budget and labor concerns, but above all, they asked how we can sustain educational excellence. These are engaged Newton voters participating in this election. Let's begin. We'll direct this first question to Victor. How are you different from your opponent as it relates to your future actions and goals on the school committee if you're elected?
Thank you, Adam, first of all. I believe there are 6 major differences between my opponent and myself. I'll start with a similarity. I think we're both, I would say, relatively good people, have been respectful of each other, so I do appreciate that and want to highlight that first. In terms of philosophical differences, my top priority is academic excellence for all children, both kids who are perhaps needing a little more extra support and folks who are at the top of proficiency level. I'm the only candidate who has experience working at the cabinet equivalent level, work directly with superintendents and school committee members, as well as also understanding the private sector side. I do not believe in the legalization of strikes. I believe in data-driven decision-making as a key element, and I'm independent from any organization and have not chosen to seek or accept any endorsement from any organization in the city. And last but not least, I am endorsed by every single city councilor who has made a choice in our race, and I think those relationships are critical.
Thank you. Jim, how are you different from your opponent as it relates to your future actions and goals on the school committee if you're elected?
Well, first of all, excuse me. First of all, my experience is direct in K-12 education. I've spent my entire professional career as a teacher and administrator. I have spoken to every kind of student. I've taught every kind of student, spoken to every kind of parent and community member you can imagine. And I have a very unique skill set from having been both a teacher and administrator that I have been able to see policy and make policy on one end and have to enact it on the other. The real difference between Victor and me is that I regard schools as being parts of the community. And first and foremost, Victor is very data-driven, but what data-driven actually means is top-down education. And I think that's probably the biggest difference.
30-second rebuttal.
Yeah, first thing is, I will always acknowledge you have been a teacher in the classrooms for longer than I think I've almost been alive. So there's a lot of credit to that, and there's a lot of great experience. I think that's critical there. So I want to give full recognition there. I do think it's important to understand that I am very much for the community. I do believe there's a bottom-up and a top-down approach. And I think the proof point of that is the fact that I have knocked on several thousand doors personally myself and had so much communication with many of you. And hearing all the support that's come from you shows that I think I understand what the community's actually asking for.
Jim, any rebuttal?
Sure, yeah, and I think, the election part I have no quibble with. But what I don't think Victor fully understands is that schools are communities within themselves. And the groups of people, students, teachers, staff, all have a voice in what goes on in the school, rightfully so, because this is how we model what a community is to our children.
Continuing on the theme of curriculum and top-up versus bottom-down, in a recent Newton Teachers Association bulletin to its members, NTA President Mike Zillis quoted an elementary school educator as saying, "I have to reconcile myself to the fact that Newton is no longer a place where we teach students, but rather one where we teach curriculum." Do you agree or disagree with this statement, and why? And Jim, go first this time, please.
I don't think this is a problem that's peculiar to Newton, but I do think that there's something to that. We have undergone 40 years of neoliberal reforms in education that have been driven by standards, that have ended up crowding out deeper learning experiences for students on an incremental basis, and worse yet, crowding out the civic mission of schools. I think that Newton, has a particular part to play in that. I think part of the reason that I'm running is to reestablish a balance between, the kinds of, fact and content-driven skills teaching that we need to do, and giving students, teachers, families agency over the education that happens here. And I think that's what's going to get us off the standards treadmill.
Victor, same question. Do you
Yep.
agree or disagree with Mr. Zalosa's statement, and why?
I'm sure that that's his perception, and I think it's important to respect and understand that's an angle from which he comes. What I would say is the direction in which we need to head is one in which curriculum is not the exclusive focus. It's a key element of education, but I think those of us who've been in education long enough know it's also about the teachers that are there, it's about the curriculum that you're using. These things are all multifactorial to drive what ultimately will be success. It should not be the case that things are purely on the curriculum basis, and it's also important to recognize that school committee members are not there to micromanage the curriculum on a day-to-day basis. We do approve, we do give our insights. I have a deep, actually, curriculum background, so there's elements that we can do to provide guidance on that, but the concept of education is about a much broader preparation than just one little aspect of that, and if that's what the direction that we feel they're going, we need to remedy that.
Discussing preparation and expectations of students. The MCAS has recently been removed as a statewide graduation requirement. Should Newton install a local version of a district-wide common assessment test as a graduation requirement? Victor?
I think the key short answer is I think that's something that has to be on the table. And I was with about 56 or 57% of Newtonians that voted to keep MCAS as a graduation requirement. It's a complex thing. I understand there's many good counter arguments to why MCAS had certain flaws or was very narrowly tailored and went to a test. But fundamentally what we need is an ability to see performance of students over time in a longitudinal way and also transparently so that folks, both parents and students themselves and teachers can all understand what exactly is happening. If you don't have a system like that, whether it's MCAS or something that's comparable to it, you don't have a good way to actually understand what's happening in the classroom, what's happening in the dynamics, and therefore you don't have transparency that you need to have the community engaged in.
So I think we should not be about the business of re-engineering MCAS through the back door. We can collect data a whole bunch of ways. We do not have to do it through high-stakes testing, and I think that would be a problem. Interestingly enough, I will be at a press briefing tomorrow to help deliver. I'll be sitting in the audience, but to sort of help deliver a proposal that for what should replace MCAS that involves project-based learning, that involves portfolio assessment. I will be joined by one of Victor's mentors, Jal Mehta. And I think it speaks to the world that we are trying to stay stuck in the 19th century in standardized testing that is behaviorism with a dollop of eugenics, rather than teaching to the 21st century critical thinking skills, empathy, communication.
So just one.
Jim, could you please define behaviorism with a dollop of eugenics?
Sure, yeah. I'll go backwards. The dollop of eugenics is really where standardized testing comes out of. It comes out of the eugenics movement. But the behaviorism is how we tend to teach, and certainly how high-stakes testing. It's learning by way of rewards and punishments. And that's exactly what high-stakes testing is. And developmental psychology, learning science says that's not the way people really learn.
Okay. Victor?
Yep, so a quick response to that. You mentioned, which I appreciated, Joel Mehta. Joel Mehta is a wonderful professor who's looking to, as you said, deeper learning aspects. He is also my doctoral advisor at Harvard School of Graduate School of Education. Even he would agree that there are important elements of summative testing that need to be had. You're right, you don't need to over-exaggerate. I think you're right that it can be problematic in its own way, but you need to have a balance. You need a balance of ability to also have these newer concepts of deeper learning, but also ways to be able to compare and understand what people are performing against, ideally as objective a standard as possible, as consistently across the district as possible, because that's the only way you can really understand how district-wide performance is happening.
Okay. Yeah. Again, I think that there are lots of ways to gather data. I will tell you that Jal will speak out against reintroducing MCAS or end-of-course tests. That's precisely why he's there tomorrow.
Let's go over to the budget, which of course influences curriculum and tools offered to our students and teachers. The large variables affecting the NPS budget have been widely discussed. Rising costs, correcting poor decisions under prior leadership, and high community expectations for NPS. As a school committee member, how will you help convince skeptical voters that city budget allocations to NPS should increase at a higher rate? Jim?
Well, I think the communication part is key. You need to take the time to unpack, the arcana of, of budgets. I think that the reason that, budgets are so, problematic here, one is that they're simply allocated by the mayor. Something in there needs to change, either on the communication of where the money is, what pockets we're drawing out of, or maybe even changing the way that we allocate budgets in the city. But short of that, we need to make it very clear to Newton residents how much the schools need, where that money's coming from, and we need to not mix in, sort of the smoke and mirrors of potential reimbursements or finding efficiencies later. The folks in Newton voted for 2 budget exclusions because they knew what they were getting. They did not vote for a budget override for the general expenditures because they didn't. We need to change that.
Victor?
Yep. Do you want to repeat the question again, just to make sure?
Sure. The large variables affecting the NPS budget have been widely discussed: rising costs, correcting poor decisions under prior leadership, and high community expectations for NPS. As a school committee member, how will you help convince skeptical voters that city budget allocations to NPS should increase at a higher rate?
Yeah, so thank you for being that. I agree with Jim that communication is one of the most important things. And when again, as I said, talked to thousands of Newtonians in the last, since March or April when I really started getting involved in this, a lot of folks, actually, I think once you explain to them the potential trade-offs and costs, they get it and they understand it. Part of the challenge has been that there's been a lot of mixed messages about declining enrollments, maybe not understanding how the system in our districts works. That degree of lack of clarity and also even some of the conversation around the strikes that threw people in different directions has led to a lot of kind of murkiness. So we need to do more, I think, in the ways of like town halls that were beginning to be done at the end of last year. Those were in the right direction, just a little bit late in the game, to explain where exactly is the money coming from, where do we go with this. We can address, I don't know if there's an opportunity to go into a rebuttal here too, but I did want to address the quick question about smokes and mirrors about.
Let's give Jim the opportunity
Okay,
for
yeah,
the first
for
rebuttal, then we can come back.
Absolutely.
Were you finished with your main response?
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, yeah.
No, I really don't have a whole lot of disagreement with what Victor just said. I think, transparency is key. I don't think that, Newton residents are against spending money on schools. I don't even think that they're necessarily against spending more money on schools. They simply want to know where it's coming from and where it's going, and I think we can do that.
Victor?
Yeah, so I largely agree. This is, I think, a great point, and good thing that 2 educators are agreeing on this element. The one point that I wanted to respond to was this quick comment about smoke and mirrors for seeking reimbursements. I do think it's very important that we're looking not just within what we can do with the NPS budget, but also look at opportunities outside. The state has, in my personal opinion, not necessarily updated their funding formulas appropriately to reflect the dynamics of special education in Newton. I've actually already started working behind the scenes on this, and no, it's not exclusively due to me. We've already seen some impacts on this where improvements in reimbursement of transportation costs for SPED has helped this past budget. So those kind of actions, I think, if we continue to push down the road, we're going to improve the situation. It's not just a theory, it's actually being done.
Okay. A follow-up to transparency and clarity, and this one will be for Victor first to keep switching off. Chris Bresky, the current school committee chair, has made NPS budget transparency, including setting an NPS allocation baseline of $296 million, which in his view reflects true costs rather than the current $292 million as a public priority of his. However, a larger direct allocation to NPS instead of a lower amount supplemented by one-time free cash and stabilization fund disbursements, as is done now, may reduce the city's flexibility in making allocations and potentially its AAA bond rating, which relies on various accounting ratios on paper. Is transparency or flexibility in collaborating with the mayor's office more important to you?
I actually don't think they're mutually exclusive, to be honest with you. I think that you can be transparent and you can have some degree of flexibility. The part that I think is going to be very critical is, as we saw from the last year, working with the city councilors, working with the mayor, and having that earlier conversation about where we are, hopefully will get us to a better place. And for whatever we have our opinions on about the prior mayor, there's going to be a new one this coming year. And so I think the folks who have already demonstrated they can build those relationships to work with those same folks are going to be able to be more transparent in communication of why we believe that there's a need to push for more funding and allocation, more direct allocation in my perspective. And that's going to be the part that hopefully we won't get to the situation very late in the game where there's complete disparate ideas of what exactly everyone's looking for and answering. Like we need to get to those relationships and those common understandings much earlier in the process with earlier communication.
Jim?
Yeah, I would agree that they're not mutually exclusive, but if you were to, sort of back me into a corner and say choose one or the other, I would choose the transparency because I trust the voters in Newton. If they have the information that they need, then they can make the ultimate decisions on who's in office to make those budgetary decisions. But I do think that, it is really important that we not, sort of push costs aside or hide them, and hiding's maybe too strong a word, but sort of sequester them as if they weren't really part of the budget. I'll take the kindergarten aides as an example. That's $800,000 that should have been part of a percentage allocation, and because the school committee wasn't honoring that commitment, it didn't get it into the budget until very late in the game.
Continuing on the topic of allocations, this was one of my favorite questions submitted by the area council survey respondents to Jim first. What is your view of the proper role of the mayor in his or her capacity as a school committee member?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think it's common to have mayors on school committees. Very often, though, they are, ex officio and not quite so powerful in terms of the budget allocation. If I were to be able to wave a magic wand, I think that I would keep the mayor on the school committee. I mean, it's the central part of local government. It's the biggest chunk of it, and he or she should be there. But that same magic wand waving would take a little authority away from the mayor in terms of just determining an allocation and give some of that to the city council.
Victor?
Yeah, the mayor is one of 9 votes on the school committee. So I think that's a critical thing to understand is that I agree with Jim, they have to have a voice in that because they're a critical part of the budget setting process. Actually, quite frankly, they have a lot of almost very unitary executive kind of degree of control over the budget. And I think the experiences that we saw from last year is that you want to be able to work with them as a colleague and again, talk to them early on. We're not going to be on everything, but at least be at the table, literally together at the table to have those conversations earlier on so that we don't get to these points where again, we're seeing strong differences of opinion surface only late in the game.
Jim, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I just would go back on, I think that there's a structural, issue there. And I think, the fact that we have a very strong mayor sitting on the school committee is, it really kind of underscores that problem. And now that we've got a mayor that has endorsed an entire school committee that he'd like to see, I think that's especially problematic.
Victor, you are one of the people that the mayoral candidate, Mark Laredo, has endorsed that your opponent just finds problematic.
Yep.
How do you respond to that?
To me, it's very simple. There's a narrative that's going out there that's saying that we're beholden to a mayor because they've endorsed me. Every single city councilor who's made an endorsement has chosen me. That includes people who are agreeing with Mark and people who disagree with him. And you can't say you're going to be beholden to people who hold very different opinions. It would also have been very unwise, in my opinion, to have the only person who's likely to become the next mayor decide that I'm not going to accept his endorsement of all of them. To me, the bigger question I'm more worried about is I think there has to be independence from organizations with whom you're going to have to deal with in a negotiation table like the NTA. Got to talk to them. They're very important partners, and I have that dialogue. But to me, the bigger question is not so much are you endorsed by the potential future mayor and other city councilors, it's are you endorsed by somebody with whom you're going to be responsible for negotiating with and potentially against when you're on the school committee.
Jim, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I just, I think that first off, it should be noted that I ask for no endorsement from any sitting politician, any former politician. Talked with a bunch of them, did not ask for a single endorsement, and there are a number of them I would have rejected. So in terms of, but I think the other piece is this, what I think is a false distinction that Victor is trying to make between being beholden to an organization and being beholden to a person. Now you can decide which you think is sort of more significant, but I do think it bespeaks the idea that Victor does not seem to regard. He regards the Newton Teachers Association as an adversary, and I think that's part of what has to change.
I can respond to that. Sorry. Yes. To me, it just, again, this comes down to understanding how school committees work. one of the 5 fundamental responsibilities is to negotiate with the union. And in 80% or 90% of the cases, I do believe that those interests will be aligned, but sometimes they won't be. And the responsibility of a school committee member is to represent the district, not just one subset of the group. And so that's a very big difference, because that's baked into the core responsibilities of a school committee member, unlike an individual's endorsement. So to me, those are night and day things, and it comes down to whether we really understand how school committees operate.
Okay, let me thank you both for the conversation. Let me pivot, I think, something related to this conversation. The area council survey respondents, we did receive several questions related to the 2024 Newton teacher strike. There has already been a lot discussed in public. Both of you, along with the other candidates, have made several statements. As the moderator, I've attempted both to respect that this forum is for the area council members, and my job is to get the topics that they are curious about into this discussion, as well as try to keep it as forward-looking and salient as possible, and not simply kind of relitigate what happened in the past. So with that wind up, I'll direct this first to Victor. Almost all the current school committee candidates have criticized the various parties' tone and communications during the 2024 Newton teacher strike.
Yeah.
The current NTA contract will expire during the next school committee's term. If there is another strike, how should the school committee act differently next time than it did in 2024?
Well, I don't want there to be another strike. I mean, and so the first question, I guess, is if you want to act differently, you got to start talking early with the key folks and actually listen to them. And I've had the opportunity to sit down with Brian Normandin and Mike Zillis and hear their perspective, because I think it's very critical for me to understand from where they were coming. And there's actually things I think I agree. The strike didn't happen without there being multiple points of failure. I do think there was opportunities on all sides. The mayor probably could have come to the table a little earlier. Some members of the school committee, I think, did not do a good job in communication, and I'll leave it out at that, because some might be future colleagues. And ultimately, though, it is the NTA's decision whether or not they're going to go on strike. I had less issues of what they were arguing for. I thought coal increases were reasonable. The AIDS was a reasonable fight. I had more of an issue with how they did it and the fact they went for 11 days. That's the issue that I want to try to resolve down the road. Well, we can address it more, but yeah.
Jim?
Yeah, first let me start with that half of that 11 days was because the school committee refused to meet. So, and all of the time was made up. So let's just, get the math right. My position is that strikes don't happen when there's good faith. Part of the bad faith, I think Victor alluded to, which was poor communication, and I think a very adversarial relationship. I think that the school committee that negotiated during the strike did a very poor job of exercising good faith, starting with trying to renege on the agreement on kindergarten aides and moving right up through the hiring of the law firm and the rest of the negotiation. But the real culprit is the model that we use. We use a zero-sum distributive model, which I think encourages secrecy and ultimately duplicity. And it makes for poor communication and I think poor outcomes.
Just, Jim, as a point of fact, we did cover for Fig City News the Newton teacher strike.
Yes.
And there were meetings between the school committee and the NTA the first half of the strike.
There were.
Yes, we can debate how productive they were.
Okay.
But I just would like, if you would like the chance to respond to that point of fact.
No, my understanding was that that the school committee was refusing to meet, and so that's I wasn't reading Fig City at that point. So had I read it, I might have been prompted to ask a few more questions. But my understanding was that there was little communication.
Okay, Victor, go ahead.
I think this is an interesting element of potential differentiation. I think it's important to surface it. I think both of us do not want to see a strike happen, and in some ways we're more common in terms of recognizing that you have that multiple parties sort of engage in this conversation to have it. I think the big difference is I want to make sure that we're addressing the conditions that led to that strike, and that starts with understanding different perspectives. If, in my opinion, you're able to resolve those fundamental conditions, I don't understand why, this is again where we disagree, why you have to push for legalization of strikes. To me, teachers are so essential and so key to the success of students that they should be in the classroom as much as possible. And it's incumbent on us as school committee members to make sure that they don't ever have to feel like they have to get to the point where they have to strike again.
Okay, Victor, thank you. You just put a slightly different adjacent topic on the table, which is legalization of strikes.
Yep.
So I want to give Jim a chance to respond.
Absolutely.
Oh, on the legalization of strikes, or
Either a rebut to Victor's rebuttal Or, Victor, you did put legalization of strikes into the conversation, so maybe you should clarify why you did that.
Because I think it's one of the biggest points of difference that we've outlined between ourselves. I do not believe that strikes should be legalized. I don't think, hopefully, that it will ever have to be a case if we can truly work on the conditions that generated this past one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. My rebuttal to Victor really is maybe not all that much of a disagreement, but it is embedded in the model that we use for negotiation that I think breeds bad faith negotiating. And I think that we need to move to a more interest-based, form of negotiation. In as far as the right to strike goes concerned, I've been very clear about this, that that the right to strike is ensconced in international human rights law, has been since 1948, was explicitly put out there in about 1966, and I'm not in the business of picking and choosing my human rights. It's associated with the right to free association, and I believe that it holds some serious weight. Now, that doesn't mean I want to strike. I also believe in the right to abortion. It doesn't mean I want people to have them. Good faith negotiations is the key.
Victor, quick rebuttal?
Yeah, so not so much a rebuttal, but I think an additional piece of color. If we look at the Unit A, the educators' contracts, Article 4 specifically acknowledges that strikes are illegal, and it says that there is no, I don't remember the exact wording of it, but basically they're not asserting the right to go on strike. So to me, even the NTA understands that this is something that is not ideal and not something that we want to do, and they don't want to do it. So to go beyond and say we got to make sure that we can legalize it for, I understand, human rights arguments, that's going even beyond what I think the NTA is agreeing in their own current existing contracts.
Yeah. And that's boilerplate language in almost all contracts, and I understand that. But you have to understand that 95% of the teachers voted to go on strike, right? And the reason for that is the bad faith posture that the school committee took. Newton's is not the only school committee that's done that. What has been done over the past 10 years is for school committees to take advantage of the illegality of strikes, to come in with their final offer and tell teachers, we'll just wait to meet until you decide to meet our terms, knowing that they will not go on strike. That's the problem.
Okay. Let's put a pin in that instead of asking you to speculate on what the
No
last
worries.
school committee was thinking. Thank you both. As I mentioned, we did receive several survey respondents about the strike, and that conversation back and forth, I think, did address several components of those questions, so thank you both. Moving to communication. Recently, very recently, 4 current school committee members signed an open letter disagreeing with social media statements made by an NPS parent who is also running for city council. Many of these same committee members have in the past expressed frustration with quote-unquote social media rumors and communication confusion. What is the role of social media in the school committee's communication with the community? Victor?
My personal take on it is the social media should be, just like any other formal channel, managed carefully and with great responsibility. That's not to say that individual school committee members shouldn't have their right to express themselves. I think that core First Amendment part is pretty critical. But I do think that we need to have a little bit more thought and discipline, I guess, upon those issues. If we want, we can address the issue of, let's be straightforward, John Jimenez, I think, who's the one that's been talked about in that conversation. But okay. Let me know.
Let's, Jim, the
Yeah.
question of what is the role of social media if you're on the school committee in communications?
Well, I think in terms of me, my zero presence in social media probably says all you need to know about how I feel about it. I'm not on Facebook, I'm not on any of the social media platforms, and I am a much happier person for it. I understand that that's part of communication these days, and people are going to say what they're going to say. But I think, like in interpersonal communication, even though it's just out into the void sometimes, and you think you can kind of say what you want, you put something out there, you're responsible for it. That's just that.
Thank you. Victor, if there's something you would like to say about how you would act as a school committee member related to the current situation, that would be great. If it's generally about the current situation, we can move on.
What I would say was I would focus on what is directly relevant to education context. So if there were something that come up that says, oh, we want to understand how do we deal with transgender participation in sports, that's a very discrete thing that, in my opinion, falls within the permit, or the remit, I should say, of an education question. But if it's getting into broader opinions of personal, takes, I said I'm going to defer to let everybody speak for themselves rather than, officially trying to opine on something as a school committee member.
Jim, any response? Or?
The only thing I think I can add to that conversation is that, I have some, working rules for how I conduct communication. If I have an issue to deal with, I ask myself, is this an email response? Is this a phone call? Is this a personal conversation? And I think, to the extent that we can ask ourselves those questions, we can manage our social media much, much better.
Okay. I think we have time for about 2 more questions and then brief closing statements. I think we're back to Jim. NPS enrollment has not recovered from an approximate 6% decline during COVID. Should increasing enrollment be a goal of the school committee, and if so, how would you assess that goal?
Well, I think that's hard to assess. You can look at the school-age population and make some inferences as to whether your population is likely to go up and go down, but what you don't know is who's going to move into town and want to take advantage of the schools. I think that there has to be an eye toward what housing looks like in Newton. There has to be a consciousness of what it means to allow the numbers to drop or to build them up by way of school choice. And I think that you really have to really look hard at your numbers, try to make the best predictions you can, and make your decisions accordingly. It sounds like a vague answer even as I say it, but it's dealing with a lot of contingencies.
Okay. Victor?
So again, I start with the data, and there's approximately 1,000 kids, I think, ballpark, that have left the school system over the last, call it 5 years. That is not just simply a demographic change. That is a meaningful reaction to things like concerns over return to school policies during COVID, concerns about the strike, and concerns about the challenges that we faced with the budget conversations this past year. So to me, it's if you want to address that, yes, this decline in enrollment that is unnatural, that is coming from folks exiting the system, is something that has to be resolved at its root level. So insofar as that's important, I do believe increasing enrollment is going to be critical, but you have to, again, address the fundamental issues. And that, I think, comes back to, again, people worried about the rigor, people worried about whether kids and teachers are going to stay in school. If we can address those factors, I do believe we're going to restore the reputation of Newton, and people will come back to the schools as they should.
Jim?
Yeah, I don't disagree with most of that, but I think part of what we need to consider is why people leave for for private schools, outside of some of the more incidental things like the pandemic and such. And a lot of the reason people prefer private schools is because they can engage in the kind of deep learning that public schools have crowded out by way of standardization and testing.
How would you analyze, going back to Victor, the issue of neighborhood schools? How do you prioritize the importance of walkability and local neighborhood elementary schools with the costs of maintaining and staffing those buildings?
Yeah, so to me, that's a very distinctive element of Newton and its elementary schools. My guiding principle will be, wherever possible, we want to try to maintain a neighborhood school environment. Now, there are certain schools, Ward, Underwood, that come to mind where this is a tricky conversation, and with significantly declining enrollments in some of those areas, we do have to think long and hard about these questions. It ties back, I think, to my prior response that if we're able to start to change the conditions where people can return, then maybe we won't necessarily have to deal with what you don't want to do is create a rash decision and say, oh, we're going to combine these two schools together just to solve short-term costs, which actually may not even help the short term, because roughly 87% of our costs are actually in staffing sides issues, which are not things you can immediately change. If you're going to change buildings, that's a much longer term conversation. So what we have to understand is, where do we think that enrollment is going to be many years out? So I think these are all very related and chain questions to one another. If you solve the question of why people are leaving, you might still be able to preserve the neighborhood environment and keep your budget a little bit more secure.
Jim?
Yeah, I've had a lot of opportunity to kind of think of this, and really from an odd happenstance, I've been doing morning standouts in front of all of the schools. I'm just about done with my second round, and so I've seen a lot of the beginning of the day at every single one of the schools in Newton, and there is a huge community, component to that, with parents saying hello to one another. I had no idea what rock stars the crossing guards are until I started doing this, and I think to the extent that we can maintain the walkability in neighborhood schools, we should do what we can. I mean, if the numbers drop out, if the bottom drops out on the numbers, we have to make hard decisions. But I think that we want to try to maintain the character of neighborhood schools.
Right. The first question was directed to Victor, so Jim, quick closing statement, if you have any, directed to you.
Well, I just go with, I think that, the school committee needs some educators on it. And I think that my experience in education has been very directly K through 12. There's not really anything that well, no, I won't say that. The minute you start saying I've seen everything, something else pops up. But I have seen quite a bit. I understand very intimately how schools run and how school systems run. And I think that, that kind of experience is precisely what is needed on the school committee.
Victor?
So first of all, thank you for moderating this, and thank you to the area for counselors for being able to make this an option and possibility. For me, it comes down to what is going to be best for kids. And in many cases, I think there's been too much conversation about, well, if you're only thinking about kids, you're not thinking about the other parts of the system. And I want to be very clear, educators need to be respected, I'm one, and educators being done well, having a good environment to work in is also going to help kids. I think there's sometimes a little bit too much of a bifurcation of it's either one or the other. But when decisions have to be made, I believe it has to be student-centric, even if it's not necessarily great for educators like myself. I have the experience, as I said from the very beginning of this conversation, to understand how things really work system-wide, and that's the level at which the school committee is tasked to operate, not micromanaging classrooms. And so while those opinions are very important, you need to understand and hear from teachers. That's why we have, in part, something like the NTA. What we need to have are people who are going to speak up for the families.
Victor, a few more seconds.
Yep, and for the students in the classroom. That's what I'm going to be able to bring to the table.
Great. Okay. Thank you both.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
with how our city is managed and how those decisions affect our public schools. They cited issues of curriculum, standards, transportation, labor and budget concerns, but above all, they asked how can we sustain educational excellence. These are engaged Newton voters participating in this election. Let's begin this debate. We have immediately to my right, Christine Fisher. In her biography, Christine Fisher is a finance and operations leader. After 13 years at Procter & Gamble, she co-founded POSIP to strengthen family engagement in schools. A Queen's University graduate, she served on the Cabot Day School Councils and Temple Shalom's board. She's running for Ward 2 School Committee, prioritizing excellence, transparency, and collaboration. And then to Christine's right is Linda Swain. Linda Swain has called Newton home for 20 years, watching her fourth-generation Newtonian children grow up in NPS K-12. Dedicated to excellence in education, she served on Cabot After School Board as president, principal search committee, and as co-president of Newton North High School Boosters. And Ms. Swain has a BA from Tufts and an MBA from Boston College. So we will direct the first question to Ms. Fisher and then to Ms. Swain, and then go back and forth for rebuttals as needed. How are you different from your opponent as it relates to your future actions and goals on the school committee if you're elected?
Thank you. I do just want to check, are we doing opening statements or we're jumping right to questions?
Jumping, then
okay,
we'll do
great.
a quick closing statement.
Excellent.
The bios were the
Oh,
standard.
perfect.
Okay.
Excuse my confusion. So I think there's a few things that differ us, and one is that I'm a parent of 2 Newton Public School students. I have a 5th grader and a 7th grader, and so I am in the schools every day around them doing drop-off and pickup, and at the soccer field, and I hear from parents on a regular basis. I have a vested interest, and we'll see the impact of the decisions that we make as a school committee for the next 10 years. The second is my really deep education experience. I've done a lot of work both professionally and as a volunteer, and I know how the systems work. And with the school committee almost entirely turning over, we need people with that expertise on the school committee.
Linda?
Thank you. I feel I differ from my opponent in a number of different ways. One, I have seen firsthand the successes and challenges at every level of the system, from K through 12. I have lived here for 20 years, and my kids are 4th-generation Newtonians, so I am so committed to the city. I'm not going anywhere. I also have the support of School Committee Chair Chris Bresky and City Council President Mark Laredo, and the majority of both those groups. In addition, my opponent early on had expressed that she was in favor of legalizing strikes. She has since changed her tune because I think she realized it was not a popular decision.
May I
Rebuttal?
rebut that?
Yes.
So there's 2 things on here. One is that I was not given advance notice that the seat would be vacated, and so I only was able to understand that there would be an open seat in this role the 2nd week of June when Chris Bresky announced that he would not be running for re-election. The second is that on my day 2 collecting signatures, someone asked for my opinion on school strikes. I was caught off guard. They did not let me elaborate. That's the only time I've expressed any kind of a position in that way, and it was because I felt as a parent that living through the strike that the fact that it was illegal prolonged it, because they kept waiting for judges to make rulings in between the negotiations, and it really made the strike last longer.
Any rebuttal?
I would just say that what concerns me is that she changed her tune because she realized it wasn't a popular choice. And she also has a treasurer who is actively in favor of the strike and legalizing strikes. Thank you.
So we received from the area council survey respondents an enormous amount of questions related to the 2024 teacher strike as a topic of interest. It is my attempt as a moderator to respect the topics that the area council members would like discussed. At the same time, recognizing neither of you were on the school committee in 2024, and we want to keep this as forward-looking and relevant as possible to help voters understand your actions in the future. So the question is, almost all the current school committee candidates have criticized the various parties' tone and communications during the 2024 teacher strike. The current NTA contract will expire during the next school committee's term. If there is another strike, how should the school committee act differently next time than it did in 2024? Linda, you first, please.
I think a number of ways the school committee can act differently. First of all, I believe that it's important to establish a strong working relationship with the Newton Teachers Association up front. So not when negotiations start, but from day one. Secondly, tone matters, and during the teachers' strike, there was not open communication between the NTA and the school committee. Finally, the mayor is a member of the school committee and should be present during the negotiations, as it signifies the importance. I've spoken to one of our mayor candidates, Mark Laredo, and he has assured me, if elected, he will be there in the room. Thank you.
Christine?
I do think building relationships is really important, and that's why I have, while I did not seek the endorsement of the NTA, because it's important for me to remain neutral between the parties that we're going to be negotiating with, which is the city as well as the NTA. I've met with their leadership already because I think that it's important to hear from them and understand their positions as we build those relationships moving forward. I do think tone matters, and I think even we can see here that the making it really sided of there was good and bad during the strike, that there were people on either sides. These issues are complex, and they're difficult, and they're very challenging for our community, and they're very challenging for parents, teachers, and all those involved. And I think we need to stop attacking each other and move forward as a community to really set ourselves on the best foot to be able to negotiate in good faith.
Okay. Linda, any response?
Nothing further.
Okay. So, Christine, what, in your view, is the proper role of the mayor in his or her capacity as a school committee member?
I think it's really challenging because they have a few roles. One is they're a voting member of the school committee, and the school committee is there in the best interests of all the kids in Newton and all the families in Newton to ensure we have the best schools for our community. But they're also there as the fiduciary responsibility for the city, and that they kind of hold the purse strings for the school district as a whole. So they're not on equal footing with all of the other members, and I think that can be really challenging. I think it's incredibly important that we have independent voices to be able to advocate the best interest and put our kids first when we're looking forward and working with the city to make sure that we get all the resources that we need to have our schools be as great as they can be.
Linda?
I think the role of the mayor on the school committee is one voting member, just like the rest of us, and it is up to us as school committee members to debate points, argue them appropriately, and if elected, I would certainly use my critical thinking skills to make decisions that are in the best interest of our kids. And I agree with Christine, we need to be independent from the mayor, but at the same time, we need to establish a great working relationship.
Okay.
That's it.
Continuing on the theme of working with the mayor, both of you in public statements, as well as most of the other candidates, have prioritized transparency and communication with the community about budgeting. Chris Bresky, the current school committee chair, has also made NPS budget transparency a priority, and he has publicly said that he believes the true NPS baseline budget allocation should be $296 million, which in his view reflects its full costs, as opposed to the current $292 million, which is a lower amount, but then supplemented with one-time funds and free cash funds by the mayor. The potential trade-off of going to the $296 million is that it may give the mayor lower flexibility to manage the city's year-over-year funding allocations and potentially put its AAA bond rating in jeopardy, which relies on various accounting ratios. So is transparency or is flexibility in collaborating with the mayor's office more important? Linda?
Can you just restate the end part of the question? You don't have to read the whole one again.
If transparency, meaning a higher budget allocation, then commits for a multi-year period the city to fund more to NPS, which reduces its flexibility and therefore might be opposite the mayoral goals, how would you think about those trade-offs?
Between transparency and, what's the other trade-off?
And working with the mayor, who will prioritize the overall city's financial flexibility and financial ratios to bond agencies.
So it's really important that we are expressing transparency relative to the school budget, and I think that Superintendent Nolan and Chair Chris Bresky did a terrific job in the spring, and I would advocate that we continue to do measures like that. In terms of the actual budget, I believe that we need a budget that enables our schools to thrive, and but not put, it all has to work within the context of the needs of the city. And that always needs to be a very, very careful balance. Don't pretend that it's easy.
Christine?
Yeah, I generally think that we can accomplish both of having transparency as well as some budget flexibility. I think overall we need to be able to increase the level of understanding within our community about how our schools are funded and what the challenges are related to those. It's extremely complex how our schools are funded right now. Even your opening statement and the question of free cash flow and bond ratings, the vast majority of people have no or little to no idea how that all works. And I think that it's really important for us to work as a school district to help the community understand what the financial needs are of our schools. And our role is to advocate for the best interest of our kids and what our schools need to be able to do that. Sometimes that's going to mean using flexibility with the city's budget, and sometimes that's going to mean increasing the overall budget.
A follow-up. Following the past spring's budget season and a lot of communication and presentations and statements, you just said that improving communication would be a priority. What should be done differently or in addition than now? And then the same question to you, Linda, shortly.
Yeah, this is an issue that I'm really passionate about and have been talking a lot on the campaign trail about. One thing we did in a previous district that I lived in was had monthly town halls with the school district's finance leader, and that it's not just in a crisis that we're communicating. I think that that was challenging during the strike. I think that was challenging during the budget discussion this past spring. If we're only communicating in sort of rushed times where emotions are high and we have limited time, we're not able to have the same discussions and level of information sharing that we can if we're doing it on a routine basis. These issues are complex and we need to be engaging continuously. Engagement is not a one-time thing. It's an everyday thing where we need to be making sure that our community has the information they need about how our schools are run.
Okay. Linda, that was technically a follow-up to Christine's statement that communication around financial matters has been overly complex. Do you have anything to add on that topic? Or a rebuttal to what Christine just said?
No, I would agree that we need to level set and enable our entire city to understand exactly where we are at from a city perspective, as well as where we're at from a school budget perspective, so one can kind of personally weigh the pros and cons in context.
Okay. Continuing on the topic of communication with the community, this question I think is Christine first. Recently, 4 current school committee members signed an open letter disagreeing with statements made by an NPS parent who was also running for city council. Many of these same committee members have in the past expressed frustration with what they had called social media rumors and communication confusion. What is the role, if any, of social media in the school committee's communication with the community?
Yeah, I'll first address the specific issue. I am very concerned about the comments that were made by a candidate who is running for city council as well. And to me, those weren't rumors because they were in his own words on a social media group. And so I think it was really well warranted for current school committee members to make comments about that. Social media can be a really great tool, and I think, like most technology, we need to be teaching our kids and showing the community how we can be leaders in this and use it appropriately. It's the same with how we have dialogue in person. It's the same with how we have dialogue on social media. We need to stop this sided discussions, polarization, and we need to be able to demonstrate and be proud to show our kids this is how we have tough discussions in our community. That can be done online, that can be done in person. But if we ignore the main communication vehicle that's out there today, we're really going to be missing a big chunk of the community.
Linda?
What I would like to add is that I think actually social media can play a very important role for the school committee and be a terrific form of communication to the broader community. I would add that I would not use it in isolation. I would also leverage traditional vehicles like email, like in-person meetings. I think the Chris Bresky, Anna Nolan meeting in the spring was a great example, and I would do that on a quarterly basis. But social media should definitely be one vehicle of communication that the school committee uses to get the word out.
Going back to combining the last two questions, communication and budget, the large variables affecting the NPS budget have been widely discussed: rising costs, correcting poor decisions under prior leadership, and high community expectations for NPS. As a school committee member, how will you help convince skeptical voters that city budget allocations to NPS should increase at a higher rate? Linda, you first.
Sure. So I think this goes back to the transparency. Every member of the NPS community and the broader Newton community needs to understand exactly where their tax dollars are going, including within NPS. So we need to set a baseline and agree upon what that baseline is so that there is transparent communication by all. I'm sorry, I forgot the second part of your question.
How would you help convince, in your capacity as a possible school committee member, communicate to skeptical voters why NPS needs an increased budget allocation at a higher rate than currently?
So I think if we set the baseline and everybody agrees to it, then we need to explain what are the challenges. We have a declining enrollment, however, greater needs amongst our students, which is causing the need for more paraprofessionals, which ups our costs. And all of that needs to be communicated clearly and in the context of the entire NPS budget.
Christine?
Similar to my previous answer, communication and engagement starts from day one and not from the beginning of an override campaign. We need to really start communicating on a regular and routine basis to all members of the Newton community, not just parents, not just those involved, but our senior community. Really get out there, and not just the people who show up or are enabled to show up to, an 8:30 in the morning on a Thursday communication from the school committee. So it starts with engagement, it starts with communication on a routine basis, and that baseline knowledge that we need to express what our needs are and why our needs are so increasing. When you have things like benefits, which is a large portion of the school district's budget, going up 11% a year, we're not going to be able to continue to fund our schools on an ongoing basis with the current allocation that we have.
Going to the topic of curriculum, in a recent Newton Teachers Association bulletin to its members, NTA President Mike Zillis quoted an elementary educator as saying, "I have to reconcile myself to the fact that Newton is no longer a place where we teach students, but rather one where we teach curriculum." Do you agree or disagree with this statement, and why? Christine?
Yeah, I'll start by reinforcing that curriculum is not within the scope of the school committee as a whole, that we do have oversight of the superintendent who implements curriculum. We have oversight of the budget, but I do think that distinction is really important. I think that we really need to work towards standardization of our curriculum across the schools. We have very different experiences right now, in particular at the elementary school level, between what our students experience, whether you're going to one school or another, and that's not okay for our community. We need to know that as kids come through Newton Public Schools, they have a similar experience. I do think there's room in there for teachers to put their own input on that curriculum, and we need to have a balance of standardized curriculum with what makes our schools so special, and that's our teachers knowing our kids and being able to adapt that curriculum to their classroom.
Linda?
I would echo Christine's comments about the role of the school committee relative to curriculum. But specific to the question, I would disagree with the question. I think curriculum is very important, and it enables us as parents to understand if my child is taking a math class and his friend is taking a similar math class with the same teachers, with a different teacher at the end of the year, they're walking out with the same information. So a standardized curriculum enables that to happen. And along with it, we need assessments so we understand exactly how we're doing.
The MCAS has recently been removed as a statewide graduation requirement. Should Newton instill a local version of a district-wide common assessment test as a graduation requirement? Linda?
So it is so important that we assess our students, because if we don't, how do we know how they're doing? And as a school committee, that is really important. So whether or not it is MCAS or it is another assessment, we need to have an assessment in place. Relative to graduation requirements, that ship has sailed, and so we no longer have that as a graduation requirement.
I have a quick follow-up to what
Sure.
you just said, but first, Christine, if you'd like to respond to the question.
Do you want to follow up
No,
first?
go ahead.
Okay. To answer directly, I don't believe that we should have a local MCAS graduation requirement. While the state law did pass that it is no longer required by the state, local communities could make that decision. While I think MCAS is very important as a tool for oversight and understanding how our schools in general are doing across the state, I think that having holistic graduation requirements that encompass the entire works of our students are really important versus a high-stakes one-day test. As a parent of some kids with some special needs, I know just how challenging those types of tests and assessments can be. I'm very in favor of Superintendent Nolan's desire to bring more assessments to our district, especially as tools for improving learning outcomes for our kids. When we wait till the end of the year and one day to test and we get the results months later, that doesn't impact our kids' education. When we can be using assessments on a routine basis with our teachers to really improve and tailor the educational outcomes for our kids, that's where assessments can be very valuable for our community.
So to summarize your answer, you are supportive of ongoing assessments, but not as a graduation requirement?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And Linda, and Christine mentioned it, the local districts do have the ability to
Yes.
put in graduation requirements.
Right.
Wanted to clarify, when you said that ship has sailed, it has not necessarily sailed for Newton. Did you have any follow-up on your thoughts of what should or shouldn't be a requirement?
Well, I would like to see a much more well-rounded assessment. It would be terrific if it had some of the elements of the portrait of a learner that the superintendent and MPS has rolled out. I think that would offer our families and our students a greater picture on essentially where they stand as a student.
Going back to you, Linda, NPS enrollment has not recovered from an approximate 6% decline during COVID. Should increasing enrollment be a goal of the school committee? And if so, how would you assist this effort?
Yes, I think declining enrollment should be a role within the school committee. I do believe every family makes a very personal choice on whether or not they send their child to private school, and the choice may be, for a multitude of different reasons. But I feel strongly that no family should ever have to make a choice of sending their kids to private school because they don't feel their kids are getting a quality education. I think as we begin to improve and roll out programs such as the new Math Pathways program, we can communicate what we're doing and the success of what we're doing, as well as begin to have universal pre-K, which would get more students involved in our schools earlier, which would ultimately help with enrollment.
I think when we're talking about enrollment, it's really important to understand the drivers. We did lose a lot of families during COVID, but that trend of families currently enrolled in our school districts leaving en masse has not continued, and in fact the percentage of Newton students who are attending Newton schools has increased over the last several years. Our enrollment decline is largely driven by demographic impacts of smaller birth rates impacting our kindergarten classes being smaller than our graduating classes. I really think it's important that we understand the data driving the outcomes within our district to be able to focus on how we solve those problems. Improving our academic rigor, making sure that families understand what we're doing and improving our curriculum is important, but if the reason for our enrollment decline is low birth rates, we have to solve that in a different way. And I've communicated before that I think expanding preschool access, which I've led initiatives like that in the past, would be a really great opportunity for us to bridge some of that enrollment decline.
A follow-up to you both who mentioned universal preschool. In the current budget environment, which has national, state, macroeconomic pressures on it, when just funding the existing services is so challenging, what's your financial context for advocating for universal preschool? Christine first, and then Linda.
Sure. I think that we need to look at a holistic picture, and getting our enrollment up overall the years is going to be really important, as well as utilizing the assets that we have. When we have some buildings that are not as utilized, have lower enrollment than others, that filling that space is important. From a budget standpoint, preschool can also be a combination of paid and funded. And so, in most communities where there is a universal preschool element, there is an income component of it as well in terms of opportunity to charge tuition for that. I think that it also is a fairly popular idea, one that a lot of families in the community supports, that's very research-based on the impact that it can have on later academic outcomes. And so it is possible that you can go back to the community for dollars specifically to that, and that's what I helped lead in the city of Cincinnati, was a citywide override to support the expansion of preschool access.
And by income component, to verify, you mean people with lower incomes don't pay as much?
Yes.
Thank you. Linda, same question. Financial context of your advocating for universal preschool?
So I would absolutely love to have universal preschool. I think the reality of that in the next 2 years is probably not strong, but I believe that we can make steps in that direction, and one creative idea I have is to really expand the fundraising efforts that we do within the city of Newton. I had a woman come up to me 2 weeks ago saying she would be willing to donate $20,000 on the spot to Newton Public Schools, and I think we can expand upon the Newton Schools Foundation or similar. There are cities and towns across the country that are funding over $1 million a year in programs, and if we could leverage similar approaches in our city, I think we can get to universal pre-K at no cost.
Anything further?
I would follow up on, because it relates to something that Linda has shared previously. I believe it was in the Beacon questionnaire about bringing private dollars into our school district. I think fundraising efforts are reasonable, but I would have concerns about when we start working with corporations or other private funders into our public schools, and that to me was a pretty concerning statement.
What is the specific concern? For background, you have both educational business experience, so what would be a concern about what you thought was your opponent's suggestion?
I think when we start to talk about private dollars, if that means corporations into our public schools, that there could be undue influence of what our kids are learning, what even marketing in the building. You're right. I worked at one of the largest companies, Procter & Gamble, and I would not necessarily want us to have branding from companies within our buildings and the exposure that has to our young minds.
Linda, any response on your statements around using private dollars as part of the budget mix?
Sure. I believe we can actually get very creative with our budget dollars, and I would support having, say, a field sponsored by a local business. I think we are at a point where it is really difficult from a budgetary standpoint, and getting creative in doing things like that could really offset some of the challenges that we have. There certainly would need to be appropriate protocols in place so that inappropriate businesses didn't have the ability to do so, and there would be a vetting process, but I think we can get very creative.
One more question and then brief closing statements. Going back to Christine, how do you analyze the trade-offs and prioritizing the importance of local walkable elementary schools with the higher costs of staffing and maintaining those buildings?
Yeah, I love our walkable elementary schools. My kids both bike to school right now. We've enjoyed in previous years walking as a family to schools, and I think that it helps build community. There's also a really important health element to kids starting their day with fresh air and a little bit of exercise before they go into a classroom. So I really believe in our local school communities. I think that back to the enrollment question, we have to look at how do we keep our schools open with those that are a little bit underutilized right now? And I think that adding some preschool classes could be an opportunity to do that. We really have to make sure that we're also, again, understanding the data and the drivers and the demographic shifts so that we're not making long-term decisions of shutting a school or selling a school building for short-term demographic shifts, and making sure that we truly bring experts into that space so that we make those decisions holistically.
Linda, same question.
So I believe strongly in neighborhood schools, and walking my kids to Cabot was like a rite of passage. It meant so much to me, and I know it means so much to so many families out there. To strike that right balance as we look at future schools, I think what is key is that we're looking at a wide set of data. It's not simply enrollment, it's not simply financial, but what are the impacts? What are the walk times? How does this impact programs? How does it impact teachers? Do teachers have colleagues that they can brainstorm with? And so for me, it's all about looking at a wide set of data in terms of making the decision when we're looking at, 2 schools versus 1 school in a particular area.
Thank you. And we directed the first question to start to Linda, so I'm sorry, to Christine. So Linda, if you'd like to make a brief closing statement, please go ahead.
Sure. So what I would like to say is my goal, if elected, is to bring back the excellence in education that so many of us, including me, moved to this city for. I support the superintendent's vision, and a large part of that is using data to make decisions and measuring student outcomes. I have seen firsthand the successes and challenges at every level from K through 12. And I'm proud of what I've seen, but I also believe there's an opportunity for us to do better. As I had said earlier, I'm supported by School Committee Chair Chris Bresky and City Council President Mark Laredo and the majority of both those groups.
A few more seconds.
I like to keep it simple and say, if elected, every decision that I make will be based on what's in the best interest of our kids. Thank you.
Thank you. Christine?
Thank you for being here today and watching online. As a parent of 2 children in Newton Public Schools, I see every day the incredible impact and strengths of our community, and also see the places where we can be doing better. I'm running because I want all our kids to have opportunities to learn and thrive. I bring a fresh and independent perspective and voice to the school committee. I am truly the independent voice in this race. I listen, I ask tough questions, and I'm able to learn from the community and learn from the people who I'm listening to. I also bring a really deep breadth of experience in education, both professionally and as a volunteer. With an almost entire turnover of the school committee, I think it's critically important that we bring people with experience into those seats to be able to navigate the challenges that our school district is going to face over the next years. I've dedicated myself to this area and improving outcomes for kids in whatever ways I can. I left my corporate job to do that in 2018 because this is the area that I'm really passionate about. My family chose this community when we moved here for the schools and to be part of this wonderful Newton community. I've dedicated myself to improving that community since the day we moved here, and will continue to do so moving forward.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you both.
Thank you.
No members of the area council. The survey went out to the entire 90,000 population. We don't have a membership, although it's a great idea. You're all members. So when we did our survey, I repeat, it went to everybody in the city and not just members of the area council, which sort of like Antifa, right? They just don't exist. Oh, now I've done it. All right. Well, we've been batting 1,000 so far. It's really been very informative debates, and I'm sure that the trend will continue through the next two debates. I'm not gonna go over the format and all that. We covered that, and Amy's gonna run the show here. Let me introduce you to Amy Sangiolo, is an attorney, community advocate, and former Newton City Councilor who represented Ward 4 for more than 20 years. She currently serves as the 11th Middlesex State Representative, where she works to advance policies benefiting both Newton and the Commonwealth. Amy's also run for mayor. Don't I know it? Underscoring her deep commitment to public service, this afternoon she brings her wealth of experience and fairness to the role of moderator, and we thank you for being here.
Do I just start? Okay. Okay. So we're going to start with introductions. Molly Brote, a former teacher turned mental health counselor, is a longtime advocate for the equity, inclusion, and student well-being. With 3 daughters in Newton Public Schools, she is deeply committed to supporting students' emotional and academic growth through strong, inclusive, and equitable public education. Welcome, Molly.
Thank you.
Jonathan Green is a Newton native, NPS graduate, and parent of Bowen 4th grader. He is the Chief Digital and Technology Officer at a large building products distributor and previously worked at Wayfair and Bain & Company. Jonathan brings broad leadership experience in finance, operations, and technology to his campaign for school committee in Ward 6. He is focused on ensuring students get a consistent experience throughout the Newton schools, making sure NPS is an exceptional place to build a career as an educator and bringing innovation to the schools. Welcome, Jonathan.
Thank you.
So we'll start. I just wanted to preface this, that the area councils, the 4 area councils conducted a survey and found that residents are most concerned with how our city is managed and how those decisions affect our public schools. They cited issues of curriculum, standards, safety, transportation, and teacher compensation. But above all, they asked how we can sustain educational excellence. These are engaged Newton voters participating in this election. So let's begin. And I'll start with the first question with you, Molly. How are you different from your opponent as it relates to your future actions and goals on the school committee if you're elected?
I think we differ in our experience, our perspective, and our approach. So my experience in my career has been all in education. I was a classroom teacher in middle school for 16 years, and now I'm a mental health counselor in elementary school. So I know schools, I know what happens in policy decisions, how it affects classrooms, how it affects teachers, how it affects students. My perspective is also varied because, although we both have students or children in Newton Public Schools, I've also worked in many different schools, and so I have a variety of experience in different schools. And my approach is one of collaboration and inclusivity, and I think it's really important to make sure that we bring every stakeholder to the table to make decisions about Newton Public Schools.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Thank you. As Molly addressed, we come from relatively different backgrounds from a professional experience standpoint. I have spent 20 years in business coming to this opportunity. I grew up in the Newton schools. I'm proud of my Newton education. I think about the role of school committee representative as being a member of the community and being a member of the board of the Newton Public Schools. There are 4 primary responsibilities for the school committee, managing the superintendent, managing the budget, negotiating the union contract. All of those things are things that are quite familiar to me as an executive, and I think I bring a really high quality understanding of what parents and voters in the city want out of the schools and an ability to reflect that back in the policy decisions that we're making.
Thank you. Would you like to do a follow-up?
No, thank you.
Okay. Touching on what you said, Jonathan, you mentioned part of the school committee's role is negotiating contracts.
Yeah.
Almost all of the current school committee candidates have criticized the various parties' tone and communications during the 2024 Newton teacher strike.
Yep.
The current NTA contract will expire during the next school committee's term. If there's another strike, how should the school committee act differently next time than it did in 2024?
I think there's a really important role for the school committee to play, candidly, long before we have to engage in the concept of a strike, about educating the city, parents, voters, teachers about what's actually happening in the schools, about what the realities of the city's finances and the school's finances are, and making sure that we are having that conversation long before we get anywhere close to what we ended up with in a couple of years ago, right? I think that the fact that we ended up there reflected a broad-based failure of communication and leadership across a bunch of different channels. I continue to believe, I believe then, I believe now, that I don't think strike, that it should be legal for teachers to strike in the state of Massachusetts. And I will put everything into making sure that we don't end up there again.
Molly?
So I think we agree that communication needs to be ongoing, and I've been happy to see that the superintendent has been consistently communicating with the union more often than was happening before. But already from being in different school committee meetings, there seems to be breakdowns in that communication already at this point. So I think it needs to be made very clear what the structures are for the union members, teachers, to communicate directly with the school committee and not have to filter through the superintendent. And I think that that collaborative, inclusive approach is going to make sure that teachers feel seen and heard and feel like they have a say in the way that schools are run. They are the heart and soul of our schools. They are extremely talented and need to be heard.
Any rebuttals?
No, I don't. Look, I don't know that I disagree with any of that. Right? I think that element of communication and being open, I think, is important. But I also think it's really important that what we're driving in the schools and that what we're teaching kids and how we're teaching them. It is not the school committee's decision what those curricula end up being, right? But I do think it's important that the city has confidence in what we're teaching, and the city has confidence in the direction that the schools are taking, and I think that's a critical element of that.
Molly?
I don't think any of the breakdown in the communication was about the curriculum or the subjects that were being taught. I think it was the tenor in which people were being talked about, the rhetoric that was being used, even the law firm that was hired to do the negotiations. I think it was an adversarial role put upon them from the beginning, and I think it needs to be one of collaboration and respect.
Well, in the year prior to the strike, there were work to contract labor actions ranging from non-participation in staff meetings to being unavailable to students outside of strict contractual hours. If you're elected, how would you respond to parent concerns about those actions if they occur again during your term? Start with you, Molly.
I'll say, first of all, I remember that, and I found it to be not actually done in practicality because teachers are so concerned about helping their students. And so I don't want to out anybody, but my kids were still seeing teachers after hours and clubs were still being run. So I don't know that it was done to fidelity because teachers have the urge to help kids. But I think, again, it shouldn't get to that point. If you are seeing that there is a work to rule or work to contract, then something is breaking down already, and you can't let that go. You need to make sure that you are working towards collaboration and consensus before then.
So what I'm hearing you say is you would take a proactive approach.
Absolutely.
Prior to anything
Absolutely.
getting there. And Jonathan?
Look, I think that our students and I think that our parents should have confidence that their kids are going to get what they need in the schools without having to rely on something happening in the schools that is not what everybody says is happening in the schools, right? So that may be true. I'll be honest with you, it wasn't that, for my own son who is in second grade, it wasn't clear to me where we were in that spectrum, but it shouldn't be that we have to rely on that as a way of knowing what's happening in the schools. I continue to go back to what I said before. I think if we get to the place that we were last year again, we have failed broadly in the background.
Okay. Any rebuttals? Or anything else you'd like to add?
I just think it shows that if it has already gotten to that point, there has been a a breakdown in communication. So that is your sign that things have already gone too far, and so it should have been fixed beforehand, and if it gets to that point again, you know that you need to act very quickly.
You're all set?
I'm all set.
Okay. So finances obviously are a big issue, and sustaining NPS's budget is going to be a continued concern. So I'll start off with Chris Bresky, the current school committee chair, has made NPS budget transparency, including setting an NPS allocation baseline of $296 million, which in his view reflects true cost, rather than the current $292 million as a public priority of his. However, a larger direct allocation to NPS instead of a lower amount supplemented by one-time free cash, stabilization fund disbursements, as is done now, may reduce the city's flexibility in making allocations and potentially its AAA bond rating, which relies on various accounting ratios on paper. Is transparency or flexibility in collaborating with the mayor's office more important to you?
I think transparency is extremely important. I think that we have already gotten to the point, and we'll get to the point again, where we need to go to the voters to ask for an override. And if it is not clear how the money that we have is being spent and why more is needed, then it's very hard to convince voters to support that. So I think transparency is key. I think it's also really important to show to people who do not have kids in the system why education costs more than it used to, and the limits that 2.5 put on us. So why do we need to ask for more anyways from the city or from the voters? So I think that's clearly important, and I think that Chris Bresky's number is a more accurate one, because we need to look at the real base budget for the schools and not the one that the mayor has given us.
Jonathan?
I agree on the issue of transparency. I don't think that anybody is really served by the game that we play right now, where we try and decide on an annual basis what's actually operating cost versus what's one-time expenses, that we can carve out that way, and it's become the way that we talk about the budgeting. So I believe strongly in getting ourselves to a place where we have a clear understanding of what's involved in running the schools. As I sort of commented earlier, I think there is a really critical role for the school committee to play in helping voters understand that, working with the mayor's office to sort through where that money comes from. I think that is a much more nuanced, much more involved, much longer term, much more strategic conversation than simply demanding that the mayor change the allocation for the schools and fully fund the schools, which has sometimes been part of the narrative and part of the campaign.
So Molly, you briefly used the word override, and so I'm curious. Do you think that, given the sort of what we've gone through in the past few years, that there is appetite for an override? And if so, do you think an override could be in the near future?
I think that after talking to so many people around Newton, whether they have kids in the system or not, that it is very clear that Newton residents truly value the schools and want them to remain excellent and to serve students as well as can be. And so I think that if an override was explained and proposed in the right way, there would be an appetite for that. I think it is very hard when you have members of the school committee and city council actively fighting against an override to sell it. And I think it's very hard to sell it when you're not understanding why there is this discrepancy between the money that people are told are in the budget versus what's actually there. And when there is not that transparency, it's harder to sell. But I think that it can certainly be done.
Jonathan?
I agree with a lot of that. I think, look, I take a different, as on the campaign trail, folks have said to me, well, how can we talk about an override? The last one failed. The reality is that, we had 3 override initiatives on the ballot the last time. 2 of them were, they were debt exclusion overrides, but they were very clearly defined investments in the Newton school system, right? And voters supported those things, right? Those 2 overrides passed. The third override that was an operating override that was harder to know what was in it, harder to know what it was for, required a lot of trust between the city University and the school committee and City Hall, and had a lot of other things in it that weren't just the schools. That didn't pass. And so I do think, if you look at the budget analysis from when the last contract passed, we are going to have to do one of something, right? We're going to have to do something either related to the pension fund, we're going to have to do something related to an override, or we're going to have to do something related to raising private money. That's kind of it. Like those are places you can go. And I do think we have to talk about all those things. So
Just based on the fact that the mayor is a member of the school committee, how do you view the role of the mayor being on the school committee and also working with you as well as the city council?
So look, I think that the mayor is a voting member of the school committee. That makes him a member of the school committee. I think that the mayor is effectively the official leader of the city. I think to the degree that the city can work together against things that, or towards things that voters and parents and community members want, I think that is what most folks are looking for out of their government, right? They're looking for a government that's gonna help move the city where they want to see it go. Look, we're in the middle of an election. Voters are welcome to vote for whoever they want to in that process, and that's how we express what our values are and where we want the city to be.
Molly?
I think in terms of the role of the school committee, when you vote on policy or things like that, then the mayor is a voting member of the school committee and has an equal say as any other member. When it comes to the budget, the mayor has a very different role than the other members of the school committee. It's not up to the school committee members to figure out the city's finances. It's up to the school committee to advocate for its schools, what the schools need. And sometimes those two things can butt heads. They're not necessarily going to be the same. And so you need to make sure that you have a school committee that's willing to stand up to the mayor and fight for what is needed for the schools and not try to be in the business of figuring out the city's finances as a whole. And, if we take from one department to give to another, that's not its role. That may be the mayor's role, but that's a very different role that the rest of the school committee has.
Jonathan? Sorry.
I just think, honestly, that I think the role of the school committee can be broader than that. I think that the understanding of where is the money going to come from and what are the realities of what has to happen to make that happen, I think is part of the purview of what I would hope school committee members engage on. It was precisely the point of view that Alicia and Chris and the school committee took this year when they pushed back on the mayor's allocation and basically sent an unfunded budget to the city council and forced an unpleasant political conversation in the city because we weren't where we needed to be in terms of funding the schools. That was effective. We ended up with more money for the schools, right? We got within a couple $100,000 of the superintendent's ask. Was it politically comfortable and convenient for everybody? No. Was it the right thing? Absolutely. And I think about the world that way.
Molly, did you want to?
I think you just agreed with what I said, that it's a different position. You need to be able to fight the mayor when it's reasonable for the resources that are needed for the schools. And so you need to have some independence from the mayor in order to do that. And I think one of the things that Chris Brzeski did that was wonderful, that was not taken into account by the mayor, was offering suggestions of how to get that money from the city into the budget, which is, totally fine. You don't need to listen to different suggestions, but that goes above and beyond. What I'm saying is it's not up to the school committee to find those resources, but to advocate for what's needed.
You're all set?
Yeah, look, I think I was clear. My point is, I think that I agree, the school committee does not control the mayor's allocation. I agree that it is the school committee's job to advocate for what is needed in schools. I think that the school committee will always do a better job if it understands what the art of reasonable and possible and reality in the city's finances are.
Okay. This Monday, I think tomorrow, actually, the school committee will be meeting, and I think there's going to be an enrollment report that's issued. So we're seeing a decline in enrollment going forward, and there are two schools on the north side that are very concerned about what's going to happen to those two schools. As we're continuing to move forward with building projects or renovation projects, and we're looking at tighter budget constraints, I'd like to know what your definition of neighborhood schools are, and a follow-up, what do you think is the cause for enrollment decline, and is there a way to address that? Let's start with Molly.
Sure. So, we saw a decline, especially in COVID, partly because a lot of independent schools were open full-time when Newton was not. And then I think for a variety of reasons, people chose to stay even when the schools reopened. And we're seeing, different demographics in the city, and people have lots of reasons why they decide not to enroll in public schools. I think that making sure that Newton is a leader in education and being innovative and inclusive is a way to draw people back into the schools. As far as the neighborhood schools, I think it's unconscionable actually that the areas that you've been talking about, the schools that you've been talking about, have been delayed and sort of nodded and smiled to for so long. Part of what we have to do as leaders is to have difficult conversations and make difficult decisions and explain the reasoning behind that, and just dragging your feet and not making decisions serves no one.
Jonathan?
I don't know how to define neighbor. This is like a Potter Stewart. It's like you kind of you know it when you see it. But I think that it has been clear to me. I took for granted, candidly, that my son gets to walk to Bowen every morning. Right? I did not. I don't know that I thought about how important that was to us, or how important that clearly is to voters. That is something that has been very clear on the campaign trail. It's a reason people move to the city. It's a reason they choose specific houses, is so that they can be close to the school, that they can get there quickly, and that they can be part of that local community. And I think that the move that we've made over the last sort of 15 years towards larger elementary schools, larger, more centralized elementary schools, is an example of candidly not really knowing what the city wanted, not really knowing what residents wanted out of their school system in their city. So I believe in neighborhood schools. I think the practical decisions on that are going to get governed by over the next couple of years, will get governed by the number of kids in the school and the ability of the city to afford to actually do the renovations on the schools that need renovating. But we shouldn't sell any of the buildings, because I do think we're going to need them, and I do believe that enrollment is a problem and that we need to figure out how to get it moving again.
Molly, did you want to?
I'll just add that I think that there are creative, innovative things that you can do with the school buildings to make them still part of the community, and that it is wonderful to be able to walk to schools and have your neighborhood schools, but it's not good for anybody to have a school with one class per grade. That's not good for students, it's not good for morale, it's not good for the community.
I agree.
Okay. I'm going to pivot a little. So MCAS has recently been removed as a statewide graduation requirement. Should Newton install a local version of a district-wide assessment test as a graduation requirement? Start with you, Jonathan.
I don't know. I was not in favor of eliminating of dropping MCAS as a graduation requirement, not because I thought we needed it per se as a graduation requirement, but because I do think that we need the data on how are the schools doing. And as a student who took the earliest version of the MCAS before it actually had any teeth and had any recourse to the students, it does not surprise me that the data now is that kids don't finish it. Right? The Globe reported on this a couple of weeks ago. The number of unanswered questions skyrocketed last year when it was no longer of consequence to the student whether they passed or not. So now we're in a place where we've deprecated MCAS as a graduation requirement, and we don't really know whether the things that we're doing in the schools on a day in, day out basis are improving the outcomes. So I believe that we need measured qualitative data on how students are doing and whether what we're doing is working in the schools. I think that needs to be recourse to the students so they take it seriously. I don't think that we need a high stakes test as a benchmark for graduation to have a high stakes test. That's not where I'm at. I just want to know how we're doing.
Molly?
Yeah, I think, our students get assessed a lot. They take standardized tests to track their progress over the grades in math and in reading. We have a tremendous amount of assessments that are curriculum-based that the teachers administrate. So I think there's a lot of data. It's just making sure that you have the right data. I think what the MCAS was originally intended to do, which is to be a comprehensive assessment system, is ideally what we should have. And I think it's actually a wonderful opportunity for cities and towns to create their own graduation requirements that match what they're hoping their graduates are when they leave the system. And Newton has put together this portrait of a graduate, and so to be able to match graduation requirements to that portrait of a graduate seems like an amazing opportunity.
Do you have anything to add? So you mentioned students get assessed quite a bit, and they get assessed based on what they're learning. In a recent Newton Teachers Association bulletin to its members, President Mike Zillis quoted an elementary educator as saying, "I have to reconcile myself to the fact that Newton is no longer a place where we teach students, but rather one where we teach curriculum." Do you agree or disagree with that statement, and why?
I completely understand that statement. We have tremendously talented teachers in Newton, which is a huge part of what has made our schools so great for so long. And in an effort, which I agree with, to make sure that curriculum and programming is consistent throughout the schools in Newton Public Schools, I think we've gone too far. Teachers are scripted and scheduled down to the minute in elementary school what they need to teach. So if they're in the middle of this amazing lesson and they think that their students, want to dive in even deeper and write more and be creative, they have to switch gears and go on to the next subject because that's what's dictated to them. So I think we have gone way too far with that. I think we need to trust that they are experts in the children in front of them, that they are given standards to teach and should be allowed more freedom to figure out how to teach that.
Jonathan?
I don't think that we should have to worry when kids get to middle school and they take their first math class as to whether or not they've all got a comparable set of experiences and a comparable curriculum experience throughout the elementary schools to know whether they belong in that class or what's going to get taught in that class. And if you listen to parents and you even talk to some teachers, that is what happens at the moment because we haven't had a consistent curriculum for a long time, right? And so kids get to middle school math, and everybody looks around, and we spend 2 months trying to figure out how to get everybody on the same page. It's not efficient from a teaching standpoint. It's sure as heck not equitable to our students as we think about the experiences that they've had across the elementary schools. So look, nobody in this process, not me, obviously not Molly, like nobody in this process wants this to feel like a rote situation where you sit down and you come in and the only thing students do is they fill out the same worksheet every day. Nobody wants that. But I do think it is critical that we understand that we have a consistent experience for kids, and that as you move up through the school system, we know whether or not kids are achieving. And I think that is the first thing I've staked out as a priority. I'm out of time, I'm sorry.
Molly?
Yeah, I would say I think before we jumped ahead to changing all the curriculum and to scripting it the way that it's been done, we could have spent a lot more time making sure that implementation was done with fidelity at all of the elementary schools, because we have these standards that are higher than Common Core standards in our state. We have curriculum in place. So the fact that that was not getting done equally across the different schools is certainly a problem to address, but I think it could have been looked at from that lens first before going to the extreme.
Jonathan, anything last to add?
No, look, Dr. Nolan has made a priority both in her entry plan and in her actions over the last couple of years, a priority of getting the curriculum updated and making sure that it's consistent. English language started 3 years ago and generally, I believe, has been very successful. Math pilots started this fall. I think all of those things are good signs and I believe in them.
Wonderful. Well, now I think we'll go to closing statements. I'll start with you, Jonathan.
I'm Jonathan Green. I'm running for school committee in Ward 6. I grew up here, and I'm proud of my Newton education. We moved back here in 2017 in large part so that my son Adam could get a Newton public education like the one that I got and that has served me so well. I've voted in Massachusetts for most of my adult life. It tends not to make a big difference on the national stage. Being part of the school committee, being part of local government, being engaged is a way for me to give back and a way for me to give back to the community that's given me a lot. And I'm excited to do that as part of the school committee next year.
Thank you. Molly?
Thank you. I'm Molly Broad. I'm also running for school committee. I have 3 daughters in Newton Public Schools, and we also moved here for the schools. They have had a tremendous experience despite COVID, despite the strike, despite the other interruptions. And I have made my career making sure that students get what they need to thrive, advocating for students in the classroom, in IEP meetings, with administration. I understand education from many different perspectives, and I think it's so important that we serve the students that we have in front of us. Education has to shift to meet the needs of the students today. And I think it's really important that we make sure to maintain levels of engagement and joy, and we can't just focus on test scores when thinking about excellence in our schools. So I want to make sure that we are thinking about students' needs first when we make policy decisions for the schools, and make sure that we become a leader in education once again.
Thank you. I think that concludes our session. Is that right? I'm looking. I'm not sure.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you for coming tonight, this afternoon. I'm going to do a brief introduction of both of you, if that's okay. Jenna Myra is a proud alum of NPS, the mom of 2 current students, and a graduate of Columbia College and Stanford Law School. As a public interest lawyer, policy advocate, and nonprofit leader, Jenna knows how to bring communities together to solve tough problems and make systems stronger. She is the executive director of the Massachusetts IOLTA Committee, which funds civil legal aid programs across Massachusetts. Welcome, Jenna.
Thank you, Amy.
Ben Schlesinger was born and raised in Newton, graduating from Newton North in 1998. He has lived in Waban since 2016 with his wife and 2 children, who now attend Zerbis and Oak Hill. Ben has an MBA from MIT and consults with startups. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Amy. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Okay, we'll start. According to the 4 Area Council survey, which they conducted earlier this year, Newton residents are most concerned with how our city is managed and how those decisions affect our public schools. They cited issues of curriculum, standards, safety, transportation, and teacher compensation. But above all, they asked how we can sustain educational excellence. These are engaged Newton voters participating in this election. So let's begin with some of top-of-mind issues. Could you first describe how you are different from your opponent as it relates to your future actions and goals on the school committee if you're elected? I'll start with you.
Thanks, Amy. So as many people know, we're going to have a huge amount of turnover on school committee next year. 6 of the 8 elected seats are open, and we're also going to have a new mayor. So we'll have 7 new folks on school committee next year. I think that makes it extra important that we have people in those positions who are ready to do the job and be effective from day one. I think what differentiates me from my opponent is that I have directly relevant experience in my professional life that will allow me to do that. I've spent my career in public service working with communities to solve hard problems together. I have a lot of experience overseeing diverse organizations that are serving communities as a whole and nonprofit budgets which have a lot of similarities with school district budgets. I also, and this is of particular importance for the upcoming school committee term, I have a lot of experience working productively with unions. The 2 large nonprofits where I've worked have both been unionized, and I have experiences being both in a union and on the employer side of things.
Thank you. Ben?
Yeah. I have a lot of experience managing large organizations and big money decisions. I have an MBA from MIT. I've been a consultant in the beginning parts of my career. I've worked at technology startups as a senior executive. I've managed executives. I've served on boards. I know about thinking, how do we use a $300 million budget and understand and measure, are we getting our dollars worth? Are we doing the things that we set out to do when we established our goals for the year? And I know how to manage the folks who we entrust with making those decisions and with leading the organization. It's a big decision, and I think that confidence in me is why of the 19 city councilors who've endorsed in this race, 18 of them have endorsed me, and of the 7 school committee members, 6 of them have endorsed me.
Okay, thank you. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
I'd just like to add on the subject of endorsements, I'm proud to have the endorsements of many, many community leaders in Newton and many former school committee members. I didn't come into this race with any political connections. Many of the elected officials who have chosen to endorse my opponent did so without giving me the chance to talk with them and explain to them what I would bring to the table as a member of school committee.
Ben, would you like to follow up?
No, I'm good, Amy, thank you.
Okay. Well, since we mentioned some of the current school committee candidates, all of the current school committee candidates have criticized the various parties' tone and communications during the 2024 Newton teachers strike. The current NTA contract will expire during the next school committee's term. If there's another strike, how should the school committee act differently next time than it did in 2024? I'll start with you, Ben.
By the time we get to a strike, we've blown it, right? We've messed up. And I think that what everybody agrees on is that it's the period before that needs to change. There needs to be more flexibility. There needs to be more listening. There needs to be less posturing. There needs to be a sense that we all want the same thing. We all want to get to the same place, and that's avoiding the strike. If we wind up there, my view is that you need to minimize the amount of public rhetoric and criticism, because whatever happens during the strike, we're all going to be together the day after the strike. The teachers are going to be teaching our children. The school committee is going to be the school committee. The administrators are going to be here. And so we need to figure out how do we maintain a tone of respect and mutual admiration that allows us to preserve that sense of community.
Shannon?
I agree with Ben that we want to start the work long before we get anywhere close to an expired contract, work to rule, or God forbid, another strike. And I'm glad to see the current school committee is taking some steps in that direction with good support from Dr. Nolan. I also agree that we need to approach members of all of the unions who work within our schools with a level of good faith and respect, and everyone needs to come to the table looking for compromises that are in the best interests of our students. I'm concerned, though, that the level of antagonism and negative rhetoric that's been going on in this campaign, including by many who support my opponent, is going to make that quite difficult. He's received an endorsement from an organization that just sent out a robocall criticizing the president of the union and blaming him for the strike. I think that's not the kind of example we want to be setting. If we say that we want to come to the table and work collaboratively, we need to really walk that walk, not just talk that talk, and that includes how we conduct ourselves during the campaign.
Ben, would you like to rebut that?
I'll only say I can't speak for everybody who supports me. A lot of people support me, and I agree with many of them on many things, and I disagree with many of them on many things too. How they behave, to the extent that I know who they are, and I think Jen is talking about an anonymous group that I haven't figured out yet. I expect people to behave in a respectful way towards everybody involved in this.
I would just add, if you don't know who a group is, I probably wouldn't accept their endorsement. And if you do accept their endorsement and they're running ads all over social media with that endorsement and you disagree with a robocall they've sent up, it might be a good idea to speak out so the community knows you don't tolerate that kind of disrespect towards our teachers.
So I haven't accepted their endorsement. They endorsed me unsolicited and never have contacted me. So I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to do about that.
So, let's see. I have a sort of a list of questions, but since you brought the issue up of social media and what's going on in social media, this has been a rather heated campaign. What do you see the role of social media in the schools committee's communication to the public? You already mentioned the role of various parties who are endorsing or not endorsing certain candidates, but what about the school committee's role in terms of social media? I'll start with you, Jenna.
Sure. I think the school committee needs to do a much better job communicating with all segments of the Newton community in all sorts of different ways. And I do think, while imperfect, social media is one of the ways to do that. So I would like to see the school committee reinvigorate its communication subcommittee and really work together to think about ways to communicate transparent, clear, actionable information out to the community about what's going on in our schools, both celebrating the successes and being straightforward about the challenges and what we're doing to meet that. When it comes to social media, there's risks and there's benefits. And so I think all I can do on social media is be transparent and straightforward and honest and try to encourage others to be the same.
Ben?
Yeah, I think that's right. It's important that the school committee is positive in the tone. And I think that as far as the channels they use, it should be an all of the above, right? There's a whole menu of ways that they can communicate. I would encourage the next mayor to allow them access to the email list that the mayor has, which I think I have heard rumors that it's 40,000 emails, it's some huge number of emails. I think it's important that we get out to more citizens more effectively. One of the things that happens, and if you're not a parent, you may not know, parents kind of get overwhelmed with the amount of communication from the schools. A lot of it is very good and very helpful, but we spend a lot of time reading a lot of emails, and the parents tend to miss stuff that comes from the school committee. So the more channels we have to access it, the better, and social media is one of those channels that might help us get to more people.
So, but how would you use social media? Not just about what's going on in the schools, but would you use it as a tool? I mean, we're obviously facing some pretty tough times coming up for the city, whether it's for the municipal budget or the school budget. So would you see social media as a tool to help better inform residents about the state of affairs in the school committee? And then how would you figure out who gets to send that message if there is not consensus on the school committee? I'll start with you, Ben.
I think the social media is a difficult platform to communicate a complex message, right? So you're probably going to use it to try to drive audience to another place. Maybe it's to a forum that you hold here, like the superintendent did at Oak Hill in the spring. Or maybe it's to a presentation that you put together, or to a website that you've built. I've been a chief marketing officer, so I have thoughts that I'm trying to simplify for this, but you go where you use the language in the location that it speaks to that audience, right? So if you're trying to speak to social media audience, you're probably talking to more younger voters, right? And you try to figure out what's going to compel them to click your button or to go to your event. And I think that it's about getting the ideas in front of them. I honestly concern myself a little less with how. We just need to get them engaged and get them to understand what we're trying to tell them.
Jenna?
I would hope that if the school committee were able to reinvigorate the communication subcommittee, they could certainly agree on some fairly low-hanging fruit, like we should be announcing all school committee meetings in advance with really clear directions about how people access the Zoom link, how they make public comment, how they find the Ed Center, how they get to the room where the school committee meeting is being heard. I think all of those can be barriers to people who are interested in participating to participating. If you haven't been to a meeting before, it can be scary to go for the first time. I've done a lot of community engagement around all sorts of types of community meetings, from tiny church basements to the LA Board of Supervisors, and I really think that kind of just clear and transparent communication about this is what we're doing, this is how you can participate, and this is how we would like to receive your feedback. I think social media works really well for that and should be a very uncontroversial use of it by the school committee.
But on the topic of communication and on how the school committee operates, I've noticed that parents have been critical of the way meetings are run, mostly because public comment has been limited to, say, 2 minutes, and then there's no follow-up afterwards. Do you have a suggestion on how to better either run the meetings or how to follow up with parents who do have the time or take the time to share their concerns with the school committee?
I do have thoughts. Thanks for the question. So first, I think it would be worthwhile to consider extending the time limit on the public comments. It's very short right now. I think an extra minute or two might help people express themselves more clearly without feeling rushed. I have a lot of experience with public meetings, as I'm sure you know, Amy. There are rules about what can be discussed at a public meeting, and it's limited to what's on the pre-published agenda. So that's the very wonky reason why, in the moment, school committee members can't respond to particular issues that were raised during the public comment period if they weren't already on the agenda. It's important to follow that rule. That rule, however, does not and should not prevent school committee members from following up with the person who gave that public comment, learning more from them, sharing responses, and bringing it back on the agenda to the next school committee meeting if it's something the entire community would benefit from hearing.
So that's something that you would promote?
Absolutely.
Ben?
Yeah, Amy, I think that the school committee meetings can be long and very detailed and in-depth, and they do have preset agendas, and it's difficult to hold off-the-agenda conversations. I think it seems a little odd when people make an impassioned 3-minute statement and the school committee seemingly ignores them and moves on. So I agree that allowing some questioning to pull a little bit more detail out or fill in blanks makes sense. I think that responding should happen offline, and I know that my intention is to make sure that for everybody who comes to public comment, they get an email back from somebody on the school committee saying, we heard you, we understand, here is something of a thought or a response to what you said. It should not be you go in, you scream into the wind, and then you go home with nothing for it. I also think it's important, the school committee's email address is public. You can reach out to the entire school committee by email. It's another way you can communicate with them.
Did you have a follow-up?
Just that if it's not on the agenda, it simply can't be discussed, and so it's always worthwhile to explain that, but that rule can't be bent. So there can't be a back and forth during that school committee meeting. It has to be dealt with at a subsequent meeting.
Right.
Okay. I'm going back to my set questions. Chris Bresky, the current school committee chair, has made NPS budget transparency, including setting an NPS allocation baseline of $296 million, which in his view reflects true cost rather than the current $292 million as a public priority of his. However, a larger direct allocation to NPS instead of a lower amount supplemented by one-time free cash and stabilization fund disbursements, as is done now, may reduce the city's flexibility in making allocations and potentially impact its AAA bond rating, which relies on various accounting ratios on paper. Is transparency or flexibility in collaborating with the mayor's office more important to you? I don't remember who I started with. Let's go with Ben.
Is transparency or flexibility more important in collaborating with the mayor's office? Okay, you packed a lot into that one, Amy. They are both extremely important. We need to have a school committee and a mayor that get along and find ways to solve problems better than we have had in the last few years. All of the budget wonking out that you just talked about, I think we can thread the needle by looking at the pension. I don't know if the pension board would be, if the retirement board would be open to extending the timeline. We're currently funding a pension through 2031. The state law says we have to fund it by 2040. I think we should look at bonding it, which is an idea that Chris has dived really deeply into. Chris has supported me, and he's been very helpful to me in the campaign. He's read me in on how this would work. I think there are opportunities there to free up a lot of cash in the near term and to work with the mayor's office to, to communicate how we want that to happen and hopefully find a result that helps everybody.
Jenna?
I think all of Newton is anxious for the school's budget and the city budget in general to move out of the crisis loop that it's been in for the last 5 or 6 years. It's been frankly quite scary to be a Newton resident and a parent of kids in school and hear that there might be 30 teachers laid off before the next school year and then be left in limbo for several months as the school committee and the mayor debate what the allocation should be. So I want us to move out of the crisis loop, and I think one way to do that is through transparent, zero-based budgets of the sort that Dr. Nolan and her team built last year that really let us see what are the needs of the schools and then gave the school committee the important task of advocating to make sure those needs are met. When it comes to that advocacy, I wouldn't say the mayor and the school committee need to get along. I would say they need to be partners, they need to collaborate, but the school committee's job is to advocate for the needs of the students and the schools, not be friends with the mayor. It is the mayor's job to figure out how to find that money within the city budget so our schools remain excellent. And the school committee members can be partners in that, can advocate, can suggest, but they play different roles, and it's important to keep that in mind when we're talking about the budget.
So, but in terms of the flexibility, what was important, I think, in the last, at least this last budget cycle, was looking at use of one-time free cash, which for many reasons is not ideal to use.
Yes.
And also looking at the stabilization fund. So do you think that having those in the sort of the back pocket, if you have tight budgets, is something that you are open to utilize and advocate and work with the mayor on? Or do you think we should expand our scope of possibilities and look at an override?
I think the second. So a mediocre solution, a short-term solution is better than no solution, and I was glad to see that the mayor and the school committee were able to access those one-time only funds. As someone who's worked in the nonprofit space for a long time, one-time only funds are a little bit of a poison pill. They get you through the current year, but they actually make the problem for the next year even harder because now you have a bigger hole in the base budget that you have to dig your way out of. So kudos to everybody who made it work for this year so we weren't laying off 30 teachers, but that's not the cycle we want to get into for budgeting. So I think we need to be realistic about what are the other sources of raising revenue, continuing to look for efficiencies within the school district, although I don't think there are a lot left to find, but we should keep looking, and then exploring things like private funding, grant making, and of course an override, which I think we very well may need in the next several years to keep our schools excellent.
Ben?
Yeah, that's all correct. I agree with that, and that's why I'm pushing for rethinking the pension financing obligation, right? That's the opportunity. We're spending $50 million this year financing this pension. If we can extend the timeline on that and cut that down to 35 or 40 a year, that frees up all the money we need to solve this problem and deal with other problems, and it frees it up in a sustainable way, not a one-time way, right? So I think that's where having background in finance and being able to dive into these numbers and try to solve these problems is important. The override question is going to come back at us, I think, at some point. And it's very simple. We're living in a cost of living crisis in the city. It is too expensive to live in Newton. If we pass an override, we raise people's taxes. I will probably support it because I think we probably needed the last one. I voted for the last one, and I think we probably will need another one. But it's our job. It's incumbent on the school committee. It'll be incumbent on the mayor to pull every other lever first before going to the taxpayers and asking them to pay more taxes.
Jenna, do you want to respond?
I agree with that. I think an override should neither be the first solution or the only solution to Newton's budget crisis, but I think it may be a tool that we're going to need to deploy. And so I think it's really a yes and situation. We need to be talking to people consistently and clearly starting now about what's happening in our schools, why they cost what they cost, and what we need to keep them excellent so that we have primed the pump, as you say, for an override if that becomes necessary. And we need to be continuing to look at all sorts of other ideas, including the pension, which I agree is also a good idea. It's not one the school committee has any ability to control, or frankly, even city council. It's up to a separate retirement board. So we should advocate for them to make a change, but we also need to be working on other avenues of getting the schools the revenues they need.
Did you want to follow up?
I would just reiterate my point. I think that if the retirement board is not willing to move, then we should look at privately bonding it, where we take out effectively a mortgage and pay it down. We have the bank pay down the pension liability, and then we pay the bank back over an extended period of time.
So I just wanted to go back to the idea of going to the retirement board. I believe the last time it was the mayor that went to the retirement board. So going back to the question about collaborating with the mayor, should there be at least that ability to work with the mayor when it's really tight, and perhaps that is one of the ways that we really want to do work out our financial situation by having the mayor go to advocate, because as you mentioned, the school committee really can't do that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think in a perfect world, the mayor and the school committee are rowing in the same direction when it comes to freeing up the monies we need to keep our schools the way we want them to be. And I hope we'll get to a point with the new mayor where we're able to do that.
Yeah, as an executive, I tell my people, come to me. If you come to me with a problem, that's okay. We'll try to fix the problem together. If you come to me with a problem and a solution, now we're getting somewhere, because you're giving me something I can say yes to, and you're giving us somewhere to go. So when I go to the mayor and I say we need more money, I'd like to go to him with more than that. I'd like to say we need more money, and here's a plan to get it that should satisfy all of your criteria. Take as much of the work off of his plate, her plate as we can, and get to the answer that we need.
So what I'm hearing from both of you is that an override could be in the near future, but not necessarily right away. Is that pretty much your assessment? Is that an accurate assessment of what I'm hearing?
I think from a financial standpoint for the schools, the sooner the better when it comes to an override is my honest answer. I think from a political point of view, with a new mayor and with an override that failed just a couple of years ago, and with the amount of division and upset we're seeing in the community around schools, I think the next year or two may not politically be the right time to go to the voters with that kind of ask. But I think, as I said before, we need to be continually laying the groundwork so that if we do need to pull the lever of putting an override on the ballot, we have an informed and educated electorate who understand what the funds are for and why they're needed.
Yeah, we should spend the first year of the next administration figuring out what other levers we can pull, and freeing up as much money as we can in other ways, and building hopefully positive political capital for the mayor, so that after that, if the override is the answer, the mayor would be able to go and try to get one.
In a recent Newton Teachers Association bulletin to its members, NTA President Mike Zillis quoted an elementary educator as saying, "I have to reconcile myself to the fact that Newton is no longer a place where we teach students, but rather one where we teach curriculum." Do you agree or disagree with that statement, and why? Jenna?
Well, I think that there is certainly some truth to that statement. I think in an admirable effort to ensure that we have more consistency across grade levels and across schools in our very large Newton system of schools, Dr. Nolan and her team have put a lot of emphasis on curriculum being implemented with fidelity, and that's important. We want to make sure that a sixth grader at Brown is getting the same math curriculum as a sixth grader at Bigelow. It's important for our systems and for our students and the equity that it worked that way. I think there are some ways in which we may have gone a little too far in that, and we've taken away the really important autonomy and independence that teachers, who are the expert educators in our district, need to be able to teach the children in front of them to the best of their abilities.
When the head of the union has a concern like that, we need to listen. We need to understand what it is. I would want to talk to Mike and understand more about what he's saying, because my experience in this building is that the teachers taught my students. They taught my now third grader and my now sixth grader, and they did it phenomenally well. and I think that they showed care and compassion, and they pushed the children, and I see that continuing today in this building and over at Oak Hill. And there's a pretty serious problem, I think, that it's understood across the system that 6th grade and 9th grade are especially hard grades to teach in the city, because those are the years when kids feed in from different schools and they all come in with different knowledge, and they've all learned different things on the way up. That doesn't make sense. We should be at a place where you can trust that the Zervis kid, the Memorial Spalding kid, and the Bowen kid who get to Oak Hill in 6th grade all have the same kind of baseline behind them.
Do you have a follow-up?
No.
The MCAS has recently been removed as a statewide graduation requirement. Should Newton install a local version of a district-wide assessment test as a graduation requirement? I'll start with you, Ben.
We should have something objective. I don't know if it's a single test or a sequence of tests or what, but there should be some sort of objective assessment for a few reasons. One of them is to take the burden off of the educators. If all we're saying is that it's educator grades, we've set up a situation where the pressure from parents toward the educators to pass kids is not going to be healthy for our relationships, and it's not going to be great for what the educators are looking for. I think we also need to think about the value of a Newton diploma. It needs to mean something. It needs to mean something standardized has been accomplished. Of course, there have to be accommodations for people with special needs. We had those before. You put together a portfolio of work over a period of time, and that checked the box here. Almost nobody in Newton, very, very few kids, did not pass the MCAS requirement before. We should get back to a system where that's the case again, and we have something objective telling us that.
I think the statewide decision to remove MCAS as a graduation requirement is a really exciting opportunity for a district like Newton to develop its own set of bespoke graduation pathways and assessments so that graduation is accessible to all Newton students, so that the Newton diploma has value, but that we're not basing all of that value on one high-stakes test, which requires a lot of time and energy to be spent teaching toward that test, which is one of the reasons the voters overall in Massachusetts, I think, rejected the MCAS as a continuing graduation requirement. I think we should look at the really wonderful Portrait of a Learner that NPS came out with last year, think about those core competencies, and figure out objective ways to assess that all of our graduating seniors have met those core competencies. I don't think we need to have one high-stakes test to do that. We assess students all the time throughout their school careers in Newton, and that's great, but I don't think we need a test to be a graduation requirement.
So what are your, so you mentioned Portrait of a Learner as one type of way to look at students and evaluate whether the students have what they need to be successful. Is there anything other outside of that that you would also include?
I mean, I think we would look at the full picture of Newton's educational goals and values and develop, and I've heard Dr. Nolan talk about this. She seems optimistic and frankly kind of excited at the opportunity to craft graduation requirements in Newton that really match what makes our district special, and have our students feel good about the diploma when they receive it. I'll also say there's only a tiny handful of states at this point that still use a single high-stakes test as a graduation requirement. So the other 45 states have figured out ways, including New York and California, to have their diplomas be meaningful without basing it off of a high-stakes test. So I have every confidence that working with the school committee, Dr. Nolan and her team can figure out a way to do that.
Ben?
Yeah, so Newton voters actually voted to keep the MCAS requirement in the city. We don't get to do that. That's not how it works. It was a statewide vote, but I think people do expect that the idea of providing the ability to thrive and the excellent education is something that we can measure along the way. It doesn't have to mean a single high-stakes test, but it means there's something objective that isn't just putting all the pressure on educators to subjectively test it.
So tomorrow night, there's a school committee meeting, and one of the subjects they'll be discussing is this new enrollment report that has come out. We have seen that there's been a 6% decline during COVID, and we're also seeing that I think this report is going to suggest that it's even a further drop than we had originally anticipated. How should the school committee address the decline in enrollment, and what do you think is the reason for the decline right now? I'll start with you, Ben.
So Dr. Nolan has done a bunch of work, and in the spring she reported some of that work out. You have to start by asking the why. What's the root cause? So she went out and she did focus groups and interviews with families that had left the system. And I think that we know that the perception that we lost our edge academically is one of the major things. I think that she's working hard. I think that measuring how students are performing and then being transparent about that with the parents, providing us with, now it's 3-star reports a year, is really helpful to give the parents a sense of confidence that we know what our child is doing inside the building and how they're progressing, and if there's something they need to work on or something they're already good at. There's a whole laundry list of other problems. She noted that people of certain religions weren't feeling safe in our schools, and that's really disturbing. We need to figure out how to make sure that every student that comes into Newton Public Schools feels safe here and doesn't go home saying they might need to go to private school to ensure their safety.
Jenna?
I agree that we need our schools to be excellent and innovative and safe and welcoming to all students, to encourage as many families for whom it's the right choice to send their students to Newton Public Schools. And there was a peak in the enrollment decline during COVID, and we have brought many of those families back into the school district, and I think that's wonderful. There are also some demographic trends in our city and in particular neighborhoods that can't be ignored, and that has caused several elementary schools in particular to fall to such a low level of student enrollment that it is difficult for teachers to do their best teaching. They can't collaborate across grade levels. It can be socially isolating for students. It's hard to implement important initiatives like MTSS when you have a very small school and teacher population. I think we need to be ready to look at the data and make hard decisions about whether there needs to be a combining or reorganizing of some of our schools to respond to some of the demographic trends that we're seeing.
I'm glad you brought that up because that was my next follow-up. So because there seems to be an enrollment issue, particularly in 2 North Side schools, Ward and Underwood, what in terms of neighborhood schools, right? A lot of people move to Newton for the neighborhood experience. How would you address or look at that issue before making a determination or recommendation to the city?
Well, I think what makes a neighborhood school is a sense of community. And I do think it's possible to build a sense of community even when students are not necessarily walking or biking to school. I'll just give myself as an example. As when I started at Ainger Elementary School, it was the year after Hamilton and Lower Falls had closed. And so a number of my classmates lived in Lower Falls, which is not walkable or bikeable to Ainger. We still had a wonderful, robust community of families at that school. My kindergarten classmates from Lower Falls continue to be 2 of my best friends to this day. And so we built a community without the ability to walk and bike. Not to diminish the importance of that, but sometimes we have to realize that we've reached a point where perhaps the benefits of having a neighborhood school are outweighed by the challenges of having a school with such low enrollment that I referenced before. So we need to be able to really look at the data and make hard decisions when it's in the best interests of our students. I was surprised that my opponent, who talks quite a lot about looking at data, told the Newton Beacon that even if the data supported it, he had no position on whether certain elementary schools should be closed. I think that's frankly putting your head in the sand. You got to make the tough decisions when it's good for our students and good for our schools.
Ben?
So the question was asked as a hypothetical, and I don't see a lot of use of engaging in hypotheticals that haven't been well defined or explained in a single sentence. So here's the way I would think about it. We need to do the best we can to look in our crystal ball. And we know a few things, speaking of data. We know that we have a report from a demographer that says that seniors are going to be moving out of single-family homes in Newton, and families are going to be moving into them. That makes sense when you think about the timing of the baby boomer generation that still lives here. We think that that's going to be playing out relatively quickly. We need to see if that happens. We know that private school enrollment went from a traditional 18-19% up to 25% during COVID, and now back to 22. We need to see if we can drive that back down to 18 or 19%. That's hundreds of kids that will be coming back into the district. If we start doing those things, then we stop having these questions about are the schools at critical mass to function. If that doesn't happen and the schools aren't at critical mass, then that leads us in one direction. If they are, it leads us in another. We also have to look at the cost benefit of the spend. Countryside is going to cost us $76 million, right? So it's probably not going to be practical to rebuild 2 entirely new schools, but there are ways we could get creative. We could think about what are we doing with pre-K. We could think about a variety of different things to balance it out. What we know for certain is that closing neighborhood schools is bad for the neighborhoods, and the neighbors remember it, and they remember the trauma of having their local schools closed, and so we have to be very, very thoughtful before we decide to go down that path.
Did you want to respond?
I agree it's a hard decision and not one to be taken lightly, but I also think those school communities deserve some certainty. They've been really stuck in limbo for over a decade as their schools have gone on and off the list for being modernized and renovated. Students benefit from modern facilities, and that's not what we have right now at Ward and Underwood. I've had conversations with teachers, students, families at both of those schools, and they are really suffering in certain ways from the lack of modern facilities. So we can't keep waiting and waiting forever to see if things might change in a particular way. I think part of the job of any leader is to make hard decisions that benefit the community by centering students and their experiences. I feel confident that we'll come up with solutions that work for everybody, that maintain a really lovely community feeling around these schools, but also get us right-sized schools and modern facilities that all of our students can benefit from.
No
Oh,
follow-up?
no, I'm fine, thanks, Amy.
Okay. The only thing that I would say is that I think also on tomorrow's agenda, they're looking at the Ward Underwood situation, and the current school committee has already come up with a time frame. So I think that will be top on your plates.
So, yes and no. They are starting a community-based engagement process, which is exactly what we should be doing. They have committed to Ward especially, and I don't remember where they left the conversation about that word, that for a 5-year period, they're not going to do anything significant. That was about a year and a half ago now. So in the next term, there should be continued community engagement and discussion and problem solving. There should be continued work with the demographers and understanding what the data and the trends and the fact patterns look like. But it's, we've made a commitment for a 4-year period, and I would intend to uphold the commitment that was made to those families.
But doesn't that go to the issue that Jenna raised about dragging our feet and not giving the students sort of the resources that they need, whether it's the modern facilities or some sort of, comfort level of where to move forward? And isn't that also a drain on our financial situation?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
These things take a very long time to do. So along the way, you have to go through a very extensive process because you look for state funding and you have to fill out applications for the state funding, and you have to go through a process. So I think that we were talking about opening a door. Dr. Nolan was talking about 2033 or 2034 as an opening date of the school. So the next school committee will be taking steps along that path to figure out what it is that we're proposing before the state. They will not, I don't think, in those 2 years make a go or no-go decision on anything.
You set? Mm-hmm. Well, now it's time for closing statements. So since we started with Jenna first, at the beginning, we'll go with you, Ben.
Thanks, Amy. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. It's great that you care enough to be here or to be watching us on the internet here. This is a really exciting, actually, moment for our schools. It's been a bumpy 5 years, but I think that we have been recovering very well. I'm really excited to get behind Dr. Nolan. She's a fantastic leader, and I really like the vision that she's laid out for her schools. I'm honored to have won a lot of support in the city, a lot of support from the political folks, and especially from Chris Bresky, who I think has done a really good job leading the school committee. I'm eager to take the baton from Chris, thank him for his service, and carry it forward and keep on building the best school system in the state.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks everyone who's here and everyone who's joined us online. I'm an MPS alum. I'm the working mom of 2 current students, and I'm a public interest lawyer. I stepped up to run for school committee because I can help. I think I can help. That's my only motivation. I'm a first-time candidate. I have no political connections. I'm not interested in politics for politics' sake. I'm interested in this position for the students' sake. I come in with a deep commitment to the students in the schools of our city and a willingness to do the work. I also want to help us move away from this cycle of antagonizing and demonizing language that's been used, directed at some of our city officials, at our teachers, at other members of the community. We need to find a way to come together and solve the tough challenges that are ahead for Newton schools. I'd be honored to have your vote. Thank you.
Well, thank you for joining in this forum. I have learned a great deal about both of your campaigns. I think it's going to be a tough choice for voters out there, but I hope that voters come out, watch this forum, as well as go to your websites, because I think they're both very informative. So thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Amy.